I layer the bottom of the tank with wood chips, and give the enclosure a few squirts with the water mister for good measure. I take a step back to admire my handiwork, then return to adjust the angle of a carefully positioned branch. Carefully positioned to look as natural as possible, of course. I flick the switch beside the tank, and both the UV heat lamps start to glow. They'll have the tank at the optimum temperature in about 10 minutes or so, I'd say. I tap a little button on my headset, and it connects back to HQ. I say HQ like it's some big dramatic location. It's an office about 5 minutes walk away from the reptile house, staffed at this moment in time by a single dude. But still, it's still our HQ. "Hey Mateo," I say into the mic, and after a crackle he replies,
"Hey Kenny, what's up dude?"
"The tank for our latest guest is complete."
"What, the gator?"
"Gator? No, dude, for the frilled snake."
"Oh, right. Yeah, sweet. I think they're planning on moving it tomorrow."
"Tomorrow? Why? It can go in right now. The enclosure is done, man."
"Well, it's just you and me here tonight, bro. So if you want, you can come and get the snake yourself."
"Sure, I'm on my way."
"Aight."
I click the mic off. I take a step back and look around. The air is thick and warm, and despite it being a cold and windy night beyond the walls, the atmosphere in the reptile house is decidedly tropical. This section of the building is below ground, meaning it's a hell of a lot larger on the inside than it looks on the outside. We have a section open to the public. They can come and visit, stop at the cafe, buy stuff at the gift shop, and see the reptiles. The stuff you'd expect to do and see. Tree frogs, lizards, snakes, and turtles. We even have some alligators. But we're different to most other places. The majority of our inhabitants are not visible to the public, and for good reason. Because here, we take care of the reptiles that, to be honest with you, all things considered, probably shouldn't exist. They're kept here, supposedly, temporarily. A stopping point before they're moved to some cryptozoology lab somewhere for proper study and analysis. That's the theory. But in practice, these places are majorly underfunded. Some of our reptiles stay with us for years, or more. Some never get requested, some get sent back, and so it's become a sanctuary of sorts. A reptile sanctuary. Or at least that's how I try to make it when I'm feeling optimistic. I often feel like a background character, to be honest with you. Someone not worth bothering about. Someone off-screen. And it gets me down sometimes. But I take pleasure and pride in my job. I do my best to create environments and habitats that these creatures will feel happy in. This is my purpose, my place. This is where I belong, I guess, for several reasons. And I try to stay positive, even when I sometimes find myself doing a late night shift in a lonely, subterranean rainforest. It's busier than this normally, I swear. I lean back with a sigh, twisting my waist and stretching my back, stifling a yawn as I do so. It really is late. I'll get the snake moved in, do my round of feedings, and then it should be time for me to clock out. And if not, Mateo won't mind if I go home a bit early. I peer through the plexiglass walls of the Tarrasque tank. Though I can't see it right now, despite its size, the enclosure is large, and there are plenty of places for it to hide. Reptiles are notoriously prone to hiding when they don't want to be seen, and they're good at it too. It's a dangerous creature though, the Tarrasque. Makes me uneasy when I can't see it. But I don't have all night, so I turn and begin to make my steady way back through the complex, passing between green, leafy trees and tanks built into bamboo stalk style walls. I pass by the homes of several of our inhabitants, some of which have been with us a long time, most of which I built and designed myself, I might add. I pause to look into some of the tanks along the way. I never tire of these reptiles, of any reptiles really. I think they're fascinating. The tank to my left is small and half filled with water. There's an elevated platform covered in dust and another with little leaves. The tank has 3 inhabitants. They're frogs, covered in thick, white-gray fur. The throat of the closest one swells as I fondly observe. Their croaks sound like musical notes, some deep, some higher pitched. Beside this enclosure resides our Ouroboros, The tank of the Ouroboros is square, and in the center is the snake in question, a long, scaled circle. Its eyes flicker briefly over to mine as it eats its tail, slowly but surely swallowing itself, digesting its own body at such a speed as to regrow as it moves. Around it goes, around and around and around, forever presumably. We've had this guy for 7 months straight now, and it's shown no sign of stopping. I give it a little salute and carry on along my way. I cross over a short wooden bridge, my feet clanking on the wood as a low waterfall rushes and splashes off to my right. There are more tanks on this side, nestled amongst the leaves. This one here is at eye level, and I peer in. This is the tank for the mo'o. Fascinating little lizards, like geckos, though with slightly larger heads and feet. I tried to recreate its native Hawaiian home in there, and I think I did a pretty good job. There are several of the lizards visible right now, some on the plants, some scuttling through the sand and the water. I tap gently on the glass, and the closest one reacts. It turns to me at once and raises its tail, the water beside it rippling softly, evaporating into mist right before my eyes. The mo'o backs up a few paces, rattling its tail, and the mist falls as rain from the top of the tank splashes onto the sand and back into the water. Some of it lands on another of the mo'o, and it stretches out, enjoying the feel of the water on its skin. When the mo'o die, they return to the landscape, which I think is particularly fascinating. They don't live long lives. One of these guys died recently by the looks of it. They're tough to spot, the dead ones, but there he is, just off to the side. The majority of his body has crystallized into a rock-like solution, though leaves and tiny vines now sprout from what once was his back left leg. At a glance, you would think him just a part of his surroundings. I think it's awesome. A perfect return to nature. I carry on along my way, reaching into my pocket for the key that will unlock the door to the freezer. As I said before, I just need to do some feeding and I'll be wrapping up for the night. I used to do this part with my girlfriend, the feeding, so it's a melancholy experience these days. I still enjoy it, but I miss her. The relationship effectively ended about 4 months ago. I've been doing okay since then, I guess. Work keeps me busy. I shiver as I step into the freezer, my breath clouding and my body unimpressed with the sudden change in climates. I grab the wheelbarrow and roll it back and forth a little to loosen the frost from the wheel, then push through the freezer and into the room beyond, the place we keep the meat to be de-thawed for an evening feed. Reptiles don't need to be fed particularly often. Most of the ones we keep here get by with 1 feeding a week, or less in some cases. There are snakes here that we only need to provide food for once a month. I load the barrow up and make sure I close all the doors behind me as I return to the humidity of the complex, moving relatively quickly before the sweat can freeze on my skin. I shut the freezer door behind me, and with a grunt, raise the bars of the wheelbarrow and set off. The wheel clattering against the wood and tile of the bridges and the floors. On my way around, I pass by the basilisk tank. The glass is made with a particular reflective surface that reduces the effect of the basilisk's notorious glare. The one we have in here is only a little thing, 4 feet or so. There's supposedly no limit to how big they can grow though, dependent on environment, climate, food, and all that kind of stuff. I grab the tongs we keep to the side and pluck a dead rat from the wheelbarrow, lowering it down into the cage and simulating movement, making it seem like the rat is snuffling around the basilisk's home, nudging aside the wood chips. And from the shadows of the cave that I built for the creature myself, out slithers the basilisk. It doesn't bother with speed. That isn't its tactic. It slithers out and raises its head, staring down into the rat's face and emitting a long, low hiss. It's a gorgeous looking thing, this creature, golden skinned and flecked with scales of caramel, with bright and staring yellow eyes. There's a pattern in those eyes that is ever changing. It ripples with a subtle and soft orange fire, dancing behind the pupils. The one we have here was born from the surprise egg of a rooster in central Colombia, and the snake has what might pass, at first glance, as a rooster-like crest along the slope of its head. The basilisk draws steadily closer, keeping its eyes ever fixed on the rat. I stop moving the lifeless creature around, holding it in place and simulating the effects of the basilisk's paralysis. The effect of the basilisk's stare is to lock the joints of its victim's body, sending signals, transmitted through vision, to the poor prey's brain, tricking it into freeing up its host's muscles. The basilisk then moves in for the kill, neck first if the victim is lucky. Otherwise, they simply have to endure until the basilisk is satisfied. A moment or two more, and the basilisk takes the bait, lunging down for the rat's head and wrapping its body with surprising speed around its limbs. A backup measure, I should think, in the event that the creature is not fully frozen. I release the rat from the tongs and draw them back out of the tank, carefully sliding the lid closed and leaving the creature to enjoy its meal. But not before its closest eye swivels round to stare at me, at this human that came with its meal. My eyes meet the basilisk's, and I feel a sudden shiver run down my spine as my brain responds to the snake's signals. The hand with the tongs start to stiffen and twitch, and I drop the apparatus to the ground with a clatter. But it's okay. This happens sometimes. I force myself to blink and to turn away, stretching my fingers and massaging my palm before crouching down to retrieve the tongs. I've pins and needles for now, but my hand will be fine after a minute or two. I continue on my route through the reptile house. The hiss of the filters are particularly irregular this evening. They fade in and out at various intervals, merging with the gentle rush of the waterfalls and pumped streams, and forming a part of the secret atmosphere, along with the tropical rainforest sounds we play on a loop through the speakers. I wheel the barrow over one of our longest bridges, one that connects to another halfway across, and built upon poles above a relatively large, sandy pit beneath us. It isn't just sand. There are heat bars and large sections of water, and a few appropriate plants as well. The creatures down there are by far my least favorite. They terrify and disgust me. And that's saying something, because as I said, I love reptiles. I'd rather not go into detail about these ones, if that's okay. I just grit my teeth and mentally switch off, getting done what needs to be done. I grab 2 large chunks of reddish, miscellaneous meat from the wheelbarrow, and with a grunt of effort, I fling them both over the side of the bridge, one to my left and one to my right. One slab lands with a thud in the sand, with a little cloud of dust, the other in the water with a splash. 2 of the creatures below jump suddenly into action. One moment they are as still as statues resting amongst the rocks, and the next they are scuttling over the sand on their hands and feet, snarling and roaring those quiet, back-of-the-throat, crocodilian roars at each other, tearing into the meat that has fallen onto the sand. The smaller of the 2 quickly gives up, scampering towards the water and sliding beneath, gliding its way to the delicious meat that slowly sinks nearby. The third of the reptiles that are kept below does not move. She does not go after the food. She simply remains in its place, crouched on one of the rocks. She stares at me, her fingers splayed out for balance, the skin beneath her chin pulsing in and out. But other than that, there are no signs of movement. The eyes, unblinking, bore into mine. This is no basilisk, but its gaze is far harder to turn from. Turn I do, though, and I carry on through the complex. 2 more stops to go. It's a fair trek to my penultimate stop. At the very, very far end of the complex, there is a door that leads to a metal railing, and this railing forms part of a walkway, high up above a large, deep pool. I push through and roll the wheelbarrow across the metal, the platform rattling as I cross to the halfway point. I set the barrow down and put my hands on the rail, looking down at the softly shimmering water below. I can't see the pool's occupant very well tonight, only a faint shadow in the depths. I grab the final piece of significant meat from the wheelbarrow, the heaviest by far, and I haul it over to the edge. It hits the water with a loud splash, and I watch as the shadow beneath it becomes larger and larger, drawing up to the surface with a keen hunger, and then grabs the slab of meat and drags it back down to the deep. It turns and swims back down, barely breaking the surface as it does so, and I cannot help a little disappointment. I catch only the briefest glimpse of one of her silverback, rigid tails, flicking out with a frothy splash before descending back down with the rest of her. Ah well, I can always rely on my final stop to be a friendly one. Back within the warmth and tropical humidity of the complex, deep in the middle of the enclosures is a small, low-walled enclosure that I built myself for a tortoise I've named Inky. I feed Inky with lettuce from my hand, and he munches happily as he chews and swallows it down. To be honest, I'm not convinced that Inky is even supposed to be here with us. He's warm-blooded, which is quite interesting for a reptile. But other than that, he's basically just a normal tortoise. His shell is white and his scales are dark gray, but he behaves just as any other tortoise would. We actually had to fit a modified AC unit into his cave so that he can cool down if needed. He has a shallow little pool also that he sometimes sits in. "You're a good boy, aren't you, Inky?" "Yeah," I murmur as he eats his food. I scratch his head lightly, which I think he likes. He continues to munch, and the hissing of the filters grows just a little louder. Just a little closer. And then, to my surprise, Inky does something rather atypical. He stops eating. There's still food in my hand, but he does not take it. He just stops. I watch with curiosity as he steadily retreats, backing up a couple of cautious steps, and then he heads into his cave. "Inky, you okay, bro?" I ask as he draws in his head, hiding himself in his shell in the shadows. And as he does so, a sense of creeping, gnawing dread begins to seep into my constitution. I am struck by a couple of urges in quick succession. 1, to turn around. 2, to run, though I am careful to do neither. Instead, I slowly rise to my feet, heart now pounding, walking calmly and coolly around the edge of Inky's enclosure till I'm standing on the opposite side. Then, with my vision fixed on the ground, I carefully turn to check my surroundings. My pulse races. What am I going to see? Is something stalking me through the complex? Blood pounds in my ears as I look from place to place, wincing as I check every new location. But I see nothing. The fear remains, but I cannot see the threat. I slowly raise a hand to tap the button on my headset. "Mateo?" I mutter. No response. He's probably fallen asleep or gone for a piss. "Mateo!" But my colleague does not respond. I check my surroundings again. Inky is just below me. The Tarrasque enclosure is just off to my right. I pause. I have not yet seen the Tarrasque tonight. We only have the one, but he is an expert at hiding, despite his size. I head to the plexiglass of his enormous tank, studying it carefully. I'll give it a quick look over, no more than a minute or so, then I'm going to get the hell out of here. Less than ideal to have the reptile loose in the complex, but I'm also not planning on risking my life here. I see a reflection of my scared face in the glass, and I shift the focus of my gaze so that I'm peering into the shadows beyond. The Tarrasque is the size of a small lion. He is a horrifying looking thing, and one of the most frightening we keep here at the complex. I'd rank him perhaps just a little lower than the things beneath the bridge. The Tarrasque is more animalistic though, and that makes him both more and paradoxically less predictable. It's tough to explain. He has 6 reptilian legs, and like our other inhabitants, is covered in scales. He is dark green and black, a living shadow in the rainforest, and his head, his face. The Tarrasque's head is too large for his body. Its face resembles a cross between a man and a lizard, with the proportions and dimensions of a great, hungry frog. Its teeth are, for the most part, square and regular, and when it grins, the teeth stretch disturbingly from one side of its face to the other. The teeth are the giveaway. That's how you find it. The hissing of the filters come to a sudden stop, and it's then, in that momentary silence, that I see that white, widespread grin through the leaves and the shadows. My heart, for a second, stops in my chest. Above the grin are the eyes, wide and orange, with the tiniest, most focused little pinpricks of pupils in their very centers. How the hell did it get out? Is the first question that comes to mind. But I suppose it doesn't matter. Not in this moment anyway. The second question is, what the hell am I going to do? I take a retreating step. The grin of the Tarrasque stretches just a little wider. I retreat a little more, putting as much space as I can between myself and the beast. I do not look directly into its eyes. I look at its feet, an attempt to be non-threatening, non-prey-like. Back I go, through the leaves of the canopy, heart hammering. Stay cool, Kenny, stay cool. I shoot a quick, risky glance over to a door on my left. It has a series of thin plastic strips across it to help keep the heat in. It leads into another section of the complex, one in which there are labs I can lock myself in as a defensive measure. Beyond those doors is also an exit, one that leads through the leaves and back to the main office that separates this secret complex to the reptile house, the one that's open to the public. I look back to the Tarrasque and realize to my dismay that it has gone. The sound of thudding, pounding feet starts getting louder and louder, the sound of a heavy tail dragging against the tile. I cannot work out where it is coming from. A scream catches in my throat and I break, running from the scene and tearing through the doorway and into the next room, running as fast as my legs will carry me. I stumble as I race over one of the bridges, fearful for a moment that I will fall, but I regain my balance and carry on along my way towards the exit. I pass by the basilisk. As with before, its shimmering yellow eye meets mine through the glass, and I feel the slight stiffening begin to take hold in my legs. "Oh no!" I shout out loud as I trip and crash into a tropical tree, wincing as I try to desperately massage the flow back into my joints. I quickly look back up the way that I came. I cannot see it, but I can hear it, which of course is far worse in the current standing. I shoot terrified looks all around me, but I just cannot tell where the thing is coming from. I stagger to my feet and hobble to the nearest door. I swear I feel the warmth of an impending presence right behind me. But when I swivel to stare in horror at the creature behind me, there is nothing there. I swear and slam my way through to the corridor that links the complex to the office, drawing it closed with a heavy slam and initiating the locking sequence, tumbling my way back to the main desk to find Mateo eating a packet of chips, watching some dumb movie on the screen. "Mateo!" I shout, and aware of my presence for the first time, he almost jumps out of his skin. "Kenny, what the hell, dude? You here for the snake? Why'd you sneak up on me like that?" "Sneak up on you? Didn't you hear all the doors slamming? Why the hell didn't you respond when I called you through the headset?" "Ah, damn, man, my bad. I forgot to turn it back on." Mateo reaches up to his ear and returns his headset to life with a small beep. I sigh and collapse into a seat, doing my best not to hyperventilate. Mateo regards me. "You good, man?" "No, not really. The Tarrasque is out." "The what?" he replies in panic, jumping out of his seat and spilling his chips all over the floor. "No, for real?" I nod. "For real? Like, actually?" "Yes." He swears under his breath and grabs up the emergency phone. He'll be calling the specialists in, though they won't be here until the morning. I pass on what I know as the phone rings, then sit back and try to calm down a little as he passes the info on to the people onto the line. He's actually back in work mode. He's scanning the screens and relaying times and information and such. I give it a few more minutes, then I stand up with a sigh and clap him on the back, heading into one of the office rooms to log the incident. As I do so, I pass by the frilled snake, our newcomer. I wipe some of the sweat from my forehead as I pause to admire it. It's rainbow colored, the light refracting in its frills to create a prism effect on the walls of its tank. "Sorry, friend," I say after a moment. "You'll have to wait a little while before you get to try out your new home. Hang tight." The incident log is a book kept near the back of one of the lesser used rooms. There are lockers in here, diagrams of unusual reptiles, and a window that looks into the complex. The secret complex, that is. I make a mental note to lock this door behind me, and to double check the others before I leave this evening, just in case. I opened up the book and flipped to the latest page, struggling to get the face of the Tarrasque out of my mind. The Tarrasque is a particularly interesting one. It's gotten out of its enclosure 3 times before, over the course of its 4 years with us here. We keep trying to fast track it to a more secure location, but for some reason, nobody wants to house it. I grab the pen and find the latest space for an entry. It is possible that nobody left the enclosure door open. There is a chance that the creature has learned how to do it himself. I guess we'll just be adding more security then. More expensive and costly measures to keep it contained. Necessary, of course, but still. Let me tell you a little bit more about the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque possesses something unlike anything else that we have amongst our inhabitants here, and that is its bite. The Tarrasque finds its target, it tears off the limbs of its prey, feasting happily on the delicious flesh, and in the moment of its bite, its saliva pours into the victim's blood and is able to actually alter their DNA. It's slow at first, but it quickly picks up speed, and over the course of a day or two, the prey rapidly loses much of its former cognitive function. It loses fur and hair, and develops just enough reptilian properties to allow it to regrow its limbs. And these are limbs which need regenerating, as the Tarrasque, of course, has recently torn them brutally off. The Tarrasque then keeps tabs on its prey, allowing it to escape, but watching patiently, stalking it, careful to see where it might go. And once those delicious limbs have fully regrown, well, then it's time for its next meal. And so the cycle continues, over and over, until the creature that the Tarrasque so cruelly targeted is able to make a permanent escape, or is eaten greedily beyond repair. I read through the last 3 incidents in the log. 2 weeks ago, Angela sprained foot on Bridge 4 by the water tanks. First aid applied in office. 1 month ago, Mateo bitten by winged frog. Treatment and antidote applied within first hour. And 4 months ago, Asha bitten by Tarrasque. Treatment applied to no effect. DNA alteration sequence commenced. I rub a hand across my forehead and add the new incident to the log in shaking fingers. I really did love Asha a great deal. She was my first, and to date, only girlfriend. Why do we keep such a terrifying monster as the Tarrasque in here at all, you might ask? The answer is simple. Without it, we have no hope for an antidote. But until we find an organization willing to try some experiments, then here it will remain. And I will do my job, over and over, around and around, like the Ouroboros. This is where I belong, here, in the reptile house. It was discovered 25 miles off the coast of Maine by a lobster fisherman. The tip of a rusted rung ladder, patinated and crusted with barnacles, jutting up through the ocean's glassy skin. You haven't heard about it on the news. You wouldn't have. The Navy buttoned it down faster than you can say Semper Fortis. Sonar scans showed the ladder descended in a vertical line for 8 miles. That's 6 miles past the ocean floor, disappearing into a newly discovered trench that made Mariana look like the shallow end of the pool. Okay, I'm being a little bit facetious, but it goes without saying that the higher-ups were concerned. Who the hell had built a ladder in the middle of the ocean? Where'd this trench come from? Aliens? Russia? That's where I came in. I was a medic officer in the Navy's oceanography program, working on experimental... Never mind. Not that it doesn't matter, it does. But if I talk about what I did, who I am, and why I'm here, I'd no doubt wake up on a trap door with a noose around my neck and treason charges being read to me by a guy in a starched uniform. I figured there's a damned good chance that it might happen anyway. Still, I'm compelled to document this because people deserve to know what I saw. The things that haunt the back of my eyelids when I close them at night. I'm in a military hospital right now, laid up in my own private suite. I'm trying to heal, but without rest, it's proving impossible. I figure getting this out of my system might help. I hope it will, at least. But what do they say in Shawshank? Hope is a dangerous thing. Anyway, I was never great at beginnings, but I guess I should start with the dive. We called it a submersible, but it was really just a suit. This was no Jules Verne clunky, cumbersome, sink-like-a-rock diving suit. It was lightweight, pressure-resistant, and equipped with all the bells and whistles that lent it its not unfair nickname, Iron Man. That's not to say it was one of those skin-tight jobs you see scuba divers wearing. It looked more like those suits that guys defusing bombs in war zones wear. That aside, I was thankful there wasn't going to be a 60-pound oxygen tank misaligning my spine. The Iron Man was equipped with an electrolysis filter which converted ocean water into breathable oxygen. The whole shebang was invisible on enemy radars and could supposedly withstand a descent of this stature. Not that it had been tested. Basically, I'd be crawling down an ominous 8-mile ocean ladder in an experimental suit that had only been tried in Navy swimming pools. My colleagues seized on this predicament, jokingly calling me Laika in the hours leading up to the dive. In case you're not familiar, Laika was the dog Soviets shot up into space in the 50s, the dog who died. So, as I stood on the hem of a small Navy vessel, also experimental, don't even ask, looking at the first few rungs of the ocean ladder, which sat 20 feet off the starboard, I wondered if this was my last taste of fresh air. "I hope your lunch wasn't too risky," my colleague Matilda joked with a smirk. "Blowing gas in that thing, you'll probably suffocate." I smiled, but behind my smile were nerves, raw, tingling nerves. I think she saw because her hand landed on my shoulder. "You'll do fine, Jones." This time, I smiled for real, hoping she was right. A nearby tech asked me if I was ready. I nodded, and the bulky submersible's helmet descended on me like a meteor. It really was Iron Man. The big window visor on the front of the helmet doubled as a screen, with oxygen and depth readings, as well as direct comms to and from my people above the surface. There was a POV camera which fed them my perspective as well, so they could monitor and record my descent, which had started an hour ago. I climbed down, rung after rung, daylight fading as I descended into the murky depths. Fish darted past, a little twist of seaweed rolled by. It was all very pastoral and oddly existential. The ocean, I'm talking the vast, naked depths of it, is huge and never-ending. Look both ways and you see nothing but bluish-green water and swirling walls of sediment, a reminder of how incredibly small and inconsequential you are. It never much bothered me, until the climb. Now, I'll never touch ocean water again. "You good, Jones?" Matilda's voice in my ear. "Yeah, hun. I'm hunky freaking dory. My deltoids are screaming." "Should've put in those hours at the gym. Where the hell are those taxpayer dollars going if you don't look good on a recruitment poster?" I felt a smile creasing my face. "The budget we got, they used models for that kind of thing." "Wait, you're telling me that strapping young stud saying forged by the sea isn't a real seaman? What the hell did I join up for?" I laughed. "Sheesh. If I'd known I'd get this much one-on-one with you, I'd have put Iron Man on a long time ago." "I'm here too," Bradley's voice. Imagine a drone operator, a gangly, pimply kid raised on Call of Duty. That's Bradley. "What do they say about 3 being a crowd?" I asked. "They say you're closing in on 500 meters, Bradley said. "Jesus, already?" I looked around. It had gotten darker, the ocean around me fading into a deep, dark blue that bled into a murky cloud. I double-checked my tether. Secure. It was a thick steel cable feeding through a pulley, a thing on rollers about the size of a brick, which ran along the right outer bar of the ladder. The tether was there in case, for some reason, I lost my grip on the narrow, rusted rungs. Because if that happened, well, anyone seen Gravity? I shuddered at the thought of sinking down and down with nothing and no one to save me. "How's breathing?" Matilda asked. I smiled at the concern in her voice, looking up at the little black eye on the top right of the visor, a camera pointing down at me. They could see my face. I could, in theory, see them too, had they decided to beam some footage onto my visor screen. But this was no time for screwing around, and my visor was filled with numerical readings. On the left side sat a little map detailing the ladder and my position, a red dot on it. I had barely made a dent. "Just fine, darling." The reason we weren't using a pod submersible, a single-man coffin connected to the above by a steel cable, was because I was on the lookout for any markings that might be etched into the ladder's metal skin, anything to denote its origin. So far, there had been nothing but barnacles, a crab exoskeleton, and a thick patina of algae. "When can I ladder slide? Or can you throw a movie up on my screen? This is getting tedious." I was half joking, but not really. It was boring as hell, one rung after the next. To make the descent faster, I was going to ladder slide, hands cupped around the outside of the rails, feet on the outside for brakes. But I couldn't do that until I hit certain water pressure, some geeky nonsense about how it would be easier to control the descent. The tether wouldn't be a problem there. The pulley was built to eat through rocks and had been satisfyingly crunching through barnacles the whole way down. "Once you hit 1,000 meters, Bradley's voice. "You guys picked that number out of a hat?" "The deeper you go, the greater the pressure bearing down on you is. Makes it easier to control." "Crap, I must have skipped that day in school," I joked, partly. "It was in the orientation," Bradley said, not trying to hide his irritation. I think he must have been jealous of my rapport with Matilda. "I skipped that too." Matilda chuckled. I smiled again, even though I hadn't been joking. "Closing in on 750 meters, Laika," Matilda said, calling me that gosh darn dog. "Better hope I've got a little more luck in my bones than rusky canines," I said, secretly hoping I was right. "I'd hate for you guys to fish me up and find my naked skeleton." "You've got charm. That's got to be worth something," Matilda said, a smile in her voice. "Is it worth dinner next week?" Bradley groaned. "God, you guys make me sick." I chuckled. "Aw, don't get blue, kiddo. You can carry rings at the wedding." Matilda laughed. "Dinner first." "Where?" "I know this great place called the Base Cafeteria." 8 o'clock Friday? "It's a date," I said, continuing down into the abyss. I had worked up a killer sweat by the time I'd reached the midnight zone, which sat just past 1,000 meters. Murky blackness crushed in. It was suffocating, eerie. I clicked on my shoulder-mounted floodlights. 2 powerful beams of light blasted forward and... wham! An ugly, deep-sea fish with a mouth of fangs went whizzing by my head. I barked a pathetic yelp and jerked back, nearly losing my grip on the ladder. "What's wrong? You okay?" Matilda asked, concerned. "Fine. Satan's spawn just caught me off guard." "Deep sea life?" "The deepest." "You go for slide," Bradley said. I hesitated, suddenly not sure how I felt about plunging down at speeds unknown into the deep, inky blackness beneath me. "Wish me luck, kids." "Luck," Bradley and Matilda said in chorus. I sucked a deep breath, moved my hands and feet off the rungs and to the outer rails, and then I slid. It wasn't as exciting as I'd thought, but it was considerably faster and less draining than climbing down. My eyes watched the ladder blur by, still on the lookout for any markings. Once or twice I skidded to a stop, thinking I had spotted something, only to discover it was nothing but deep-sea gunk canked to the metal. By the time I did see any markings, I was too far gone for anyone to care. I stopped, not sure what I was looking at. A strange symbol etched directly into the middle of the rung in front of me. It looked like a weird cross between Arabic and Chinese. "Guys, you seeing this?" No reply. "Hello?" No reply. Finally, Matilda's voice. "Jones, the footage is freaking out. You okay?" "I'm fine. Is this getting through?" Silence. No reply. Jones, you there? Matilda, growing concerned. I said I'm cool. Bradley, distress in his voice. Buddy, you getting us? Just fine. Can you hear me? I felt panic squeezing at my lungs. Was the comm system messed up? My screen began to flicker, glitching out. I was growing concerned. Jones, you're not coming through. I reached up to my visor and gave it a smack. The readings on the screen momentarily realigned before spazzing out beyond control. Now my colleagues' voices were warbled. Words were lost, full of static. Jones, can't hear. Are you? Guys, I can't hear you. Fear in my voice. A low hum built in my ears, and then silence. No voices, nothing. My helmet basked in the glow of the flickering screen. I had lost contact with the world above. I froze, not sure what to do. Split between the symbol on the rung and the disconnect from my safety net. Well, that's not completely true. Remember the tether connecting me to the rung ladder? There was a little button on the pulley box beneath the lucite case. Punch that button and the pulley box would zip me back up to the surface. Okay, screw it. I was going back up. None of this was worth a damn if I didn't have my crew watching my back. I fumbled out an underwater camera stashed in the pouch of my chest, snapped a photo of the symbol, and began the 10-foot climb back up to the pulley box. That's when I saw the mermaid. It flitted out of view, the silhouette of a man-sized fish. I froze. Not sure what I'd seen. It had only been there for an instant, etched in the beam of my floodlights. Then it was gone. Had I really seen anything? My breath was shallow, cold in my helmet. I looked to my right. The water was black and murky. I looked to my left, and at first I didn't realize what I was seeing. A wall of bodies. Hundreds of mermaids surrounded me, their eyes glowing pinpricks in the light, their needle-sharp teeth jagged and yellow. They were awful, deep-sea things, their tails yellow and scaly, their torsos pale and emaciated. Instead of arms, they had straw-thin appendages with hooked tips. When my light hit them, they broke apart, darting off into the darkness in a cacophony of shrill chitters. Jesus Christ, I whispered, my voice hoarse, my throat like sandpaper. I looked up and saw the pulley box, only 5 rungs away, the button taunting me, the button that would save me. Or maybe I was already past the point of saving. I didn't wait. I climbed. Fast as I could go, 1 rung after the next, 4 rungs, 3, 2. A shrill chittering split the water. I looked to my left as a mermaid shot toward me, its hooked appendages clawing at my suit. I grunted and threw up a defensive arm. A razor shredded through my flesh. Blood pumped out of my ruined arm. I cried out, my suit beeped, screaming warnings in my ear. The fabric instantly sucked together, automatically sealing the breach as the mermaid flew off, and in came another. I threw the button box on the pulley open, about to slam it down when a freight train barreled through my midsection. The horrible, twisted face of the mermaid filled my visor. It had torn me off the ladder. I floated, entangled with this awful creature. Its gills undulated as it chittered in my face, a great ear-shredding sound that cut a bolt of fear through my stomach like an icy dagger. I grunted and jammed my fingers into its gills, hating the way its flesh crackled as I twisted. Now the mermaid was struggling out of my grip. I was winning. Then I wasn't. Something pounded into the ladder, jarring the pulley box, and something else hammered into my back. It was like being caught in a trash compactor, a dozen of these things crushing in on me. I screamed, flailed, fought for my life. Then suddenly, the mermaids dispersed, tails flickering as they flew off into the depths. I was alone, completely alone, floating through the water. 15 feet from the ladder. I assessed the damage. My suit was mostly okay, except for my arm. Blood pumped through the fabric, funneling out and into the ocean. Each section of Iron Man was isolated, so if one part got damaged, it wouldn't compromise the integrity of the whole outfit. So water wasn't flooding my helmet. Yet. It very well could be soon. There was a crack in my visor. I quickly reeled myself in, closing in on the ladder and the pulley box, which was my last and final hope. Then I saw it. My heart sank. My stomach dropped. The pulley was nearly hanging off the ladder's rail. It was close to breaking off. If that happened, I'd simply drift, fall, die in this oppressive darkness. I moved slowly, surely, reeling myself in on the cable which rattled the box with each pull. I was lassoing the excess cable around my elbow as I went. My hands reached out, fingertips skimming the rung ladder. That's when I saw the shark. At first, I thought it may have been a mountain that slid off land some long year ago, left to float these murky depths eternally. But no, it was a shark, the biggest living thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. It must have been twice the size of a Boeing 747, a great pale monster outlined in my floodlights, eyes as big as swimming pools. Its mouth. I couldn't bear to think what might be in its mouth. Oh my God. But that didn't seem to be enough. Oh my God. It filled my horizon, moving closer. I was paralyzed by fear, my heart jackhammering my ribcage like a manic construction worker. My hands reached out for the ladder, grabbed a rung, started to pull myself up, when the pulley box broke free of the outer rail. I looked up and slipped. My hand slipped. My other hand shot out, grasped the ladder, and then a rush of water blew me away. The shark was passing, and I was sinking. Propelled downward by the force of the shark's movement, displacing impossible tons of liquid as it swam. I flailed, grunted, screamed, the readings on my visor still flashing warnings. Then I was being sucked down into the depths. The shark continued on. I drifted down. The ladder slowly, painfully pulling away from me until it faded from view. I tried calling to my people above, screaming into my helmet. At some point I stopped, realizing they were long gone. And to them, so was I. I sunk for years. It felt that way, at least. Left to die, a prisoner of the ocean, stranded in a world of darkness. After a while, still sinking, I blacked out. I jolted awake at the bottom of the trench, in the ruins of a great city. Pillars of rock, spires of stone, the husks of incredible mausoleums and colosseums rose around me, greenish in their eon-old patina. The city filled the trench as far as I could see, which was oddly far, seeing as a strange glowing orb filled my horizon. It was an impossible sun, a green ball of light pulsing and bubbling with heat, hovering off in the distance, bathing these alien depths in ethereal light. I stood up. A thin tendril of blood trailed up through the fabric from the gash on my forearm. I knew it wasn't a mortal cut, but it was nasty and left me feeling woozy. I cinched it tight with a Velcro strap and looked around. There was nothing but dead buildings stretching endlessly. Ugly, deep-sea fish cut through vacant windows and doorways. I wandered the city for a while, looking for signs of life or any vestiges of the ladder that had brought me here. I found neither. I walked for a while, hours, days maybe. I slept some, I awoke and walked more. Time must have worked differently down here. The atmosphere felt languid and disorienting. I'm not sure how long I spent wondering. I found sprawling pictographs on the inside of a domed building. They depicted an aquatic people that once ruled this underwater world. I saw 100-foot effigies of a multi-headed, dragon-like beast with a multitude of clawed legs and a variety of gills spread out across its form. Among them were other smaller statues of the beast rolled into a ball. Sometime during my interminable sentence spent in that sunken kingdom, I realized the ball statues were depicting the beast's likeness as an infant, curled up in an egg. That gave new meaning to the glowing green orb on the horizon. Sometimes, after staring at the green sun for hours, I thought I could decipher the outline of the fetal beast wrapped in on itself, pulsing with life, waiting to be born. Eventually, my mind slipped away from me. I heard voices, Matilda's, Bradley's, a barking dog I thought might have been Laika. Sometimes I spoke to them, other times I didn't, just grateful for the company. And then, after a long while, I died. I was brought back to life on a lobster boat. Two grizzled Mainers with accents like molasses found me floating listlessly and pulled me aboard. They scraped off my suit and resuscitated me on the fish gut-strewn deck of their little lobster tug. They thought I was dead. My skin was cold, pale as a fish belly. Then I blinked to life. I took a rattling breath of fresh air, savoring the salty taste on my tongue. I looked up at the real world, at the two men around me. All I could do was cry. I was brought to a hospital, then airlifted to the one I'm in now. Matilda came to visit me immediately. She asked me what had happened. I told her. I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. I wouldn't believe me. I was gaunt, my hair long, my beard scraggly. I looked like I had survived a lifetime on a desert island, except for the fact that I was ghostly pale and not sunburned to a crackling brown. But it was good seeing her, until she looked me in the eyes and told me I had been missing for 8 months. Military man after military man came to visit me, higher-ups in crisp uniforms weighed down by medals. I was interviewed until my head spun. My story never changed. I told them to check my handheld camera. I learned it was never recovered. Whether they didn't believe me or didn't want to wasn't entirely clear. I had my scar to back up my story and my time spent missing. I told them to send another man down, but they gave me some bureaucratic word vomit about how the risk assessment blah blah blah. Apparently, that suit I'd taken down wasn't cheap. Who would have thought? In the end, none of what I said seemed to matter. Perhaps they figured me for a deserter who took their top secret tech and defected to God knows where. Tralfamador, maybe. All I know is that at some point or another, I was declared insane and ordered to a stint of convalescence, where I remain. I've tried to make sense of it all, but I can't. I wonder about the latter, and whether it was built as an invitation to that underwater place, or as an escape. Since I've gotten back, there's been a hollow ache in the center of my chest, a low hum in the pit of my soul. It's constant. It's dread. Dread at what I've seen. Dread at what might be growing in that green sun. Dread at what might become of the world if that thing ever rises to reclaim its kingdom. I've come to the end of my tale, and I still don't feel any better. Every time I close my eyes, I see that green sun. I see it pulsing and flickering with life, and now I know for certain that it's an egg. Picture this scene, if you would. Place yourself in my shoes. I stand alone. The surrounding fields are vast and sparse. Oceans of sickly, yellow grass ripple in the breeze. Waves roll across them and out over the gentle hills, shimmering towards the horizon in all directions. It comes up to about knee height, this grass, and there is little else. Above the rolling grass is the evening sky, gray tinted with purple, and its clouds are dark and cold as they rumble slowly by overhead. My bike rests against a section of broken fence just behind me. Dust swirls about my shoes. I'm still wearing my work clothes. My tie blows out to the side, and I make no effort to try and straighten it. It's cold, but I do not shiver. And ahead, about 20 or so paces into the field and fixed in the center of my vision, stands the tree. Like myself, it is alone. It towers up above, the trunk twisting slightly around before branching out in all directions. The leaves are thick and they rustle and shine. The rungs that my friends and I once hammered into the side are still there, though many are in the process of being absorbed and swallowed by the expanding trunk. The treehouse itself, if any part of it has survived all these years, is hidden. I reach into my pocket and withdraw the note I have stashed there, the contract, and I read it over. I hereby promise that if we are both unmarried by our 30th birthday, then we shall marry each other. This is a binding contract. The agreement and ceremony will take place beneath the treehouse at 7 p.m. on the day of our birthday. Signed, Thomas Evans and Lauren Bright. Lauren and I have the same birthday, you see. It was always a running joke that we would get married. We made and signed this note when we turned 11, and today is my 30th birthday. Our 30th birthday. So I guess I'm here to fulfill my end of the deal. I fold the paper up and return it to my pocket, and with a sad sigh, I push forwards, making my way through the grass as I approach the great tree. The wind blows in my ears. There are a series of hearts carved into the trunk, hearts that have survived the years. Some are cruder than others, but there must be about a dozen in total. I count them. Yes, a dozen hearts. They're all ancient, you can tell just by looking at them. Most of them have initials inside. S+R, J+J, etc. But one of these hearts has only a single initial inside. It reads L+. This was our heart. I never did add my own initial. I was too shy, too self-conscious. I played along with all the marriage jokes, sure. I signed the contract, but the carving of this heart was too much, too personal, too real. And so my 11-year-old self laughed the moment away, acutely aware of the hurt in Lauren's expression, but pretending not to notice. I waver where I stand. Perhaps coming here tonight was a mistake. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I always knew this day was going to be difficult. I don't really know why I came here, to be honest. Maybe for some hope at closure, I guess. For something. I've long since given up on a normal life. My memories haunt me, and I dare say they always will. I look back up to the treetop. The greenish rungs of the ladder disappear into a cloud of leaves overhead. I close my eyes as the breeze blows past my skin. I remember my little groups of friends, the 5 of us. We would cycle here all the time, back when our houses were all within distance. I live across the country now, but it's nice to know that the tree still stands. I remember the adventures we used to have, the ideas and plans we'd plot up right here in this treehouse, the games we'd run and the stories we'd make up, together. Lauren and myself, Jake, Jasmine, and Wooly, the gang. All gone now, of course. All dead. All except for myself. Our time together runs like a river through my head. I see myself with them all. I see our greatest shared memories. I remember the construction of this treehouse. We didn't have the internet to guide us back then, so we copied instructions from an old magazine. I remember Jake hammering into one of his fingers and using a swear word we hadn't heard before. We thought we were going to get in trouble when a farmer rolled by in his loud and angry tractor, so we hid ourselves up in the leaves, giggling quietly and pretending to shoot it as he passed us by. The memory blurs into the next. I remember our school trip to the city's science museum. It was themed around the 4 classical elements: fire, water, earth, and air. The teachers allowed us to work as a group, and we explored that place from top to bottom. Different colored flames reacted to various metals, huge water cylinders, and cyclone displays. There was an earthquake simulator, I remember. Jasmine was terrified, but I convinced her to join us. There was a wind tunnel and miniature lightning. The memories drift to another. We're standing in front of the school, the night of the summer performance. We're all terrified, of course. Beneath the watchful eyes, everyone is watching us, judging us. I remember stumbling one of my lines, faltering, but Wooly was on stage too. He kept us going without skipping a beat. I don't think anyone even noticed. And once it was over, the elation, the celebration, we had never felt so powerful. I remember our first trip abroad. Lauren's parents allowed us to all join them. We were so lucky, visiting a foreign country together, and at such a young age. There was a water park there. It was incredible. We got shouted at by some lifeguard, but of course we couldn't understand a word he was saying, so we simply ran away, laughing and splashing. And I remember the night of November 5th, bonfire night, the fireworks exploding overhead, red and green and gold, the warmth of the great burning bonfire and the drifting embers. Jake and Jasmine and Wooly firing off sparklers, and once it was over, that night, back at Jake's house, that's where Lauren and I had our first kiss. Our only kiss, as it happened. The memories sting. I open my eyes and wipe a hand across them. The leaves rustle in the rising wind, and the waves roll out across the grass. I cannot change the past. I reach into my other pocket and I draw from it a small carving knife. Stepping a little closer to the tree, I rest one hand on the cool, rough bark, and with the other, I finish the decades-old inscription. I complete it the way it was always meant to be completed. I cut away at the wood until the heart reads L+T, and then I sheath the blade and step back. I'm not some deranged lunatic, by the way, just for your own peace of mind. I'm not some grown man in love with the ghost of a dead kid. I loved Lauren, sure, but in the same way that I loved the others, that I loved all of them. I just could have done better by her back then, that's all. And this carving is as much an apology to her as it is a favor to my 11-year-old self. I'm sorry, Lauren, I say, my words quickly disappearing into the wind. I'm sorry for the heartache I caused you. I reach into my pocket for another look at the note. My hand trembles and I collapse to my knees, stricken with a deep and sudden ache, a pain in my heart that has kindled across the years. I'm sorry, I force out. I'm so sorry. What are you sorry for, stupid? Comes a voice that I would recognize at the ends of the earth. My sorrow is shocked to oblivion as I snap my head up to look at the voice's source. Above me in the tree and peeking through the leaves is Lauren. I stare up at her, terrified and unable to move. Lauren? I manage at last, choking on my words. She looks just as she did, still wearing that same pink hoodie. She kicks her legs idly against the truck, watching me expectantly. Well, she says, sticking out her tongue, are you coming or not? And she suddenly lifts up her arms, grabbing something out of sight and hoisting herself into the leaves, vanishing with a rustle. Wait! I scream, throwing out a hand, and before I know it, I'm scrambling up the tree behind her. My foot slips off the second rung. Too much of it has been swallowed by the trunk. I try again, forearms strained as I grab to what I can, hauling myself up the side of the mighty tree, heart racing. I'm losing my mind, I think, as the wind barrels against me. I'm losing my mind. But I don't stop climbing. Up I go, ascending into the leaves. But the ladder keeps going. I look all around through the branches, but all I can see is a world of rustling green. Lauren! I shout, desperately. Wait! Where are you? I hear her giggles up ahead. I crane my neck to see her disappear through another cluster of leaves. So up I climb. Higher and higher through this ancient tree. We never built it this high. We couldn't have. We were just kids. But it certainly feels high now as I force my way up. I glance below, but I cannot see the bottom anymore. I'm fully enveloped in the green of the tree. Twigs snap against my arms, against my face as I keep pushing through, until at last, the ladder comes to an end. I haul myself up onto the platform, and catching my breath, I look all around. Our treehouse had always been impressive. We'd worked hard on it, and it was a real labor of love. But this is something else. The platform I find myself on is colossal. Leaves and branches wind their way around wooden pillars and arches. I stare in bewilderment at rope bridges extending away through an impossible treetop canopy, onto other platforms and levels in the leaves. On the opposite wall, where I remember carving my name along with the others, where I remember 5, not quite in line names scrawled in quick letters, there are now only works of art. The names are there, sure, but they are intricate, carved with care, beautiful and dramatic. They'd be better placed in a museum or a cathedral. but my eyes are drawn now to the owners of these names, because there they stand, all around me, just as I remember them. Jake, Jasmine, Wooly, and Lauren. Jake has his arms crossed, an eyebrow raised. Jasmine has her hands behind her back. Wooly has his thumbs hooked into the straps of his backpack, and Lauren has her hands on her hips. "What took you so long, Tommy?" she asks. I fumble for words, stuttering and spluttering, and she laughs. Wooly holds out a hand to me. "We've been waiting for you, bro," he says with a grin. "Guys," I begin. How did..." But Jasmine interrupts. "There'll be time for questions later, Tommy. We need you." "You need me?" Wooly's hand is still extended towards me. He waves it. "Of course we do, Tommy. The treehouse is under attack. Now come on, soldier. Get up." I reach for his hand, and I realize that they are the same size. My hand and Wooly's. His grip tights and pulls me up to my feet, and I find that we are all the same height. I look down. My shirt, tie, my work shoes, all replaced with the clothes I wore as a kid. My battered jeans with the hole in the knee, my blue jacket. "I don't understand," I whisper, looking between their faces, the faces of my ghosts. "What more is there to understand?" Lauren asks, reaching out and squeezing my arm. "This is our treehouse, Tommy, and we won't let the enemy take it from us." A grin spreads out across her face. "Come on!" And with that, she leads us away through one of the arches. Wooly follows, raising his fist with a battle cry, and Jake and Jasmine follow. Jasmine looks back at me. "Tommy, come on!" And so I do. I stumble after them, and together we run through the treetop complex, beneath arches and over the bridges, the wood clacking as we race from platform to platform. We reach a series of platforms at various heights, all within sight of each other. There are wooden weapons here. We'd always talked about constructing things like this, but we never got around to it. One looks like an enormous catapult. Looking down to my right, there is what appears to be a massive rifle. It's wooden, of course, so I don't know what it fires. And there are gaps in the leaves here too. They show us the endless fields beyond, though they are green now, green streaked with gold from the light through the clouds. "To your stations, men!" Wooly suddenly shouts. "And women!" The others salute him, and I feel compelled to do likewise. "Fix up those weapons and defend the treehouse. The first wave will be the farmer. He comes from below. Those are your orders." "Sir, yes, sir," we finally say. I find myself chanting it along with the others, unable to hold back a sudden rush of elation. We run to the various platforms. Mine has one of the wooden rifles on it, but it isn't quite complete. I watch as the others hurriedly fix up their own stations, passing each other tools and lifting planks of wood over their heads. "Tommy!" Jake shouts at me, and I turn to him just in time to catch a wooden wheel he has thrown, recently carved. I furrow my brow and look to the weapon, realizing at once where this next piece has to go. I attach it in place and move aside some of the wooden boards, angling one so as to rest the barrel of the weapon upon it, for a more surer aim, of course. "Bollocks!" Jake shouts suddenly, and we turn to him. The idiot has managed to smack himself in the thumb by the looks of it. We laugh, but Jasmine checks that he's alright. I'm fine, he says. "Get back to your station. The enemy approaches." And the enemy approaches indeed. "Here we go!" My adrenaline surges as a monster rises up behind the hills. A tractor, perhaps? I think at first, but no. It's a behemoth of metal and smoke, chuntering and growling as it rolls through the fields towards us. Two sizzling yellow eyes, glowing in the dusk, stare right at us up here in the tree. "Fire at will!" Wooly commands, and the weapons are launched. "What is happening?" a voice asks me inside my head. "Thomas, what are you doing?" But I ignore it. There are more important matters at hand. With one eye closed, carefully aiming, I pull the wooden trigger of the rifle. I feel a surge of recoil as the weapon thunders out a beam of light, like a laser, directly towards the oncoming metal monster. I feel the blast of heat against my face. My hair is blown back from my forehead. "Whoa!" I shout out loud as the beam blasts into the side of the rumbling machine. I hear the cheers of my friends as their own weapons are launched, Further blasts and beams. I fire again. The treehouse shakes and the monster roars. Great black clouds are sent up from the machinery of its body as it stumbles and staggers. And at last, defeated, it alters its course. The rumble of its gears is loud in our ears as it turns aside, fleeing the scene, trundling away across the fields and out of sight. I laugh with elation, but there is no time now to revel in this victory. Lauren has grabbed my sleeve. "Come on," she shouts, dragging me from my station. What is it?" I respond breathlessly. "That was only the first wave, Tommy," Wooly calls from the front of the procession. "And we can't do this without you." So on we race, across first one bridge and then the next. And the second bridge is far, far longer than the others. It stretches over a great yawning chasm of leaves and branches. It swings and creaks in the wind. And it's a long, long way down. The group falters. "I can't do this," Jasmine mutters, paled and shaking her head at the bridge's beginning. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," I find myself saying, looking into her face, reassuring her with my expression. "Nothing can stop you. You've got this." She bites her lip and then nods, and we set out together across the bridge. The second we've all stepped foot onto it, however, that's when the storm begins. Like we're in a wind tunnel, almost. "Hold on!" Wooly roars above the rising gale, his trademark woolly jacket trying to escape from his shoulders. The storm brings with it streaks of pocket lightning. All around us, that crackling in the air, the lightning flashes against the leaves. Bursts of different colored flames leap up all around us as we run the length of this swinging bridge. Fire, water, air. It becomes harder to see, but the others are all still there. "Hang tight!" Lauren cries out, gripping to the sides of the bridge and turning away from a sudden, cyclonic barrel of rain, blasting around us and drenching us through. The tree rumbles and the bridge shakes. Beset by tremors, it feels like it could collapse at any moment. "Keep pressing forwards!" Jake shouts, and we do. The group continues its advance through the elements, huddled together, and there, through the water and storm, is the opposite side, the next platform. Wooly steps off first and helps us all onto it, and we leave the thunder behind as we start to push through the leaves. Pushing through, deeper and deeper into the canopy as the noise of the storm begins to fade behind us. "You guys still there?" Jasmine calls out as it grows darker and darker. "We're all still here. Follow my voice," Wooly replies, and we continue to push aside the walls of leaves, heading further and further into the treehouse, until suddenly the leaves all clear. We stumble out as a five, still immersed in darkness, and our breathing echoes around the space. The sounds of the storm are distant now, a faint, backing rumble. A beat passes, and the rumble rises into a round of applause. "It's wave 3! It's a trap!" Jake exclaims as lights appear before us. Great mechanical thuds and judders as they blink into life. Blinding and bright and burning, I can feel their heat against my skin. I can feel it drying the rain from my clothes. We are standing on a wooden stage. The lights before us multiply into dozens, then into hundreds. Hundreds of pairs of glowing eyes, watching, judging, staring through the darkness, all around. Beneath the watchful eyes. It's just like before, all those years ago. This is how it felt. I can feel my throat starting to close up. I can feel the panic rising. I cannot remember what to say. There's something I need to say to defeat these intruders. But what is it? What are my words? Wooly steps forward, unaffected like the rest of us by this spell, this twisted enchantment. "This treehouse is ours, not yours. You will never take it from us, here? You will never truly take it, for we will never truly leave." He looks back to me, his eyes fierce in the reflection of the lights. "Right, Tommy? Isn't that right?" And he is. He is right. I say so out loud. I join my words to his. "This place is ours," I cry out, defiant. "This is our home, and this is magic. This magic is ours, and you are not welcome." The eyes widen in rage, the heat increases, but only for the briefest of moments. I shield my face, but watch as the eyes retreat, as one by one they disappear back into the darkness, as the cool of the air returns. And already my friends have begun to move, onwards to the next platform. The final traces of light from the eyes have revealed the door in the wooden wall to our right, a passageway through the treetop. Jasmine pauses at the entrance to this passage and looks back at me. "Come on, Tommy. We can't go on without you." I nod, determined to drive on. I reach out for her and she pulls me through the passage. We stumble for a moment in the dark until at last the shadows disperse and we are once again surrounded by deep, dark, fresh green of the treehouse leaves and branches. Ahead are a series of platforms. Built into these platforms are what looks like tunnels in the wood. They look almost like slides. Slides. I slip and stumble where I stand. Glancing down reveals that water has begun to rush past our feet. The scent of chlorine rises thick into the surrounding air. "Step carefully," Lauren warns as Jake slips over into the rushing stream. Wooly grabs him by the collar and hauls him back up before he falls. "How is this possible? How is any of this possible?" I murmur out loud, grabbing onto a branch as the water flows past us. It pours from the platforms and between the branches. Some of it rushes across the wood and down the tunnel-like slides ahead. "What are you talking about?" Wooly replies, grinning. "The treehouse is under attack, Tommy. Weren't you listening?" And with this, his eyes widen. His mouth drops open as he stares behind me, past my shoulder. The others do the same, and I swivel where I stand, still holding on to the branch for support. A monster approaches. Pushing aside the branches, he has to stoop as he is so tall. With every step, he kicks up great splashes and waves of the running water. His eyes are like red coals in the gloom. His limbs are long, much longer than they should be, and a shining silver whistle hangs from his neck on a chain. It clinks with every one of his great and heavy steps. The platform rattles and water is sent rushing in all directions. He turns to us, bellowing loud in a foreign tongue, and he increases his pace, charging right towards us. "Quickly!" Lauren shouts. "Down into the tunnel!" She grabs me and hauls me back, and we support each other as we run and splash through the stream, careful not to slip, ducking beneath branches as we hear them snap behind us. "Go, go, go!" Wooly shouts with a mad laugh, urging us down into the slide. Lauren goes first, and then Jasmine and Jake. I shoot one last look behind me as I leap down into the tunnel, and I see the monster slip and stumble in the rushing water. He roars and crashes down with a rumble, vanishing out of sight as the slide turns a sharp, sudden corner. Wooly is not far behind. I see him laughing and whooping, the water rushing past. I turn to look the way I am going, picking up speed as the tunnel and the water shoot past. The echoing laughs of the others reverberate around me, building to shouts of triumph as the slide ends with a great and torrential splash. Jake pushes his fringe out of his eyes and raises his hand for a high five. I meet it and grin as he helps me up. Lauren runs over, laughing, shouting and pulling me quickly out of the way as Wooly zooms down just behind me, splashing us all yet again. We spend the next few minutes just screwing around, splashing in the water as the leaves rustle softly in the breeze. Lauren at last draws back and looks down at her watch. The level of light has changed. She is highlighted in beams of silver that have broken through the branches. We all are. "It'll be time now, guys," she says, looking around. "We did it!" Wooly stands suddenly to attention, brining his hand up into a salute. We all do likewise. "Stand down, men, and, women. Mission accomplished." "Sir, yes, sir," we respond, and he turns, pushing aside some leaves to reveal a ladder, moss-lined but in otherwise great condition. Up he goes, rung by rung, clambering up through the tree. Then Jake, then Jasmine, then Lauren. She looks down to make sure that I'm following. "Time for the big finale, Tommy." "Yes," I replied. "Right behind you." And I put my hands up onto the ladder and begin my climb. Up we go, us five, through the treehouse, higher and higher. The light filters through where it can, illuminating the tips and edges of the leaves in that glorious, shining silver. Higher and higher until we break through the very top of the tree itself. I breathe in a deep breath of fresh night air and look up to the sky, feeling the natural breeze against my skin. There are perches up here, in bows of the tallest branches, natural seats and resting places, and the group spreads out just a little, finding their places, settling in, breathing easy and enjoying our victory. I take a seat next to Lauren. "Lauren," I begin. "What's—" "Shh," she interrupts, smiling. "It's about to start." She turns to look up to the sky, and so I do likewise. It's beautiful. The moon is bright, the stars glimmer. A shooting speck flits across my field of vision, and soon the stars are joined by great bursts of color. Fireworks, of course, like I've never seen them before. Great, dazzling, dreamlike explosions of red and green and gold, tipped with fiery orange or with shining silver like the leaves. They whiz and spin and cascade like spirals within spirals. They are celebration incarnate. And thinking about it, perhaps I have seen fireworks like this before. This is exactly how they appeared to me, once upon a time. A warmth rushes over me, a familiar glow. Lauren reaches out for my hand, and I take it in mine. The fireworks burst and shine, and just like that, I feel myself start to cry. I cannot stop it, and the tears flow. Lauren squeezes my hand just a little bit tighter. "I'm sorry," I mutter, and then louder so that everyone can hear. "I'm sorry, all of you. I'm so sorry. I wasn't there. I wasn't there for you. Things could have been different." They're beside me now, and I'm sobbing. I remember it all. I remember why I came. The note, the marriage contract between Lauren and I. And I remember how they all died, the ghosts that now surround me. When we were 11 years old, we'd all signed up for a school trip in the winter. We were due to spend 3 nights at a campsite, a school excursion, fun, games, camping, expeditions, and all that good stuff. But I knew how Lauren felt about me by then. I was struggling with my own feelings. I was just a scared, dumb, young kid, and I couldn't face it. I couldn't face the intimacy of almost 4 days together in such an exciting environment, and I knew the others would just egg me on and pressure me, so I faked being sick. I faked an illness and convinced my parents to let me stay home. So that's what I did. I just stayed home because I didn't want to see my friends, because I didn't want to spend this trip with them, because I just didn't want to go. Well, they never ended up going either, as it turned out. The bus driver was not qualified. It was a parent volunteer. A volunteer with little experience driving in the snow and on ice. I'll spare you the details, but as I sat playing video games in my living room, the bus went through the rail on a cliffside road. It was a steep drop, and half the passengers were killed. Amongst them were Jasmine, Jake, Wooly, and Lauren. "I should have been there," I choke out, looking between them. "I wasn't even really sick. I was just pretending. I made it all up because I was a coward." Wooly laughs, shakes his head. "You think we've never faked being sick before, bro?" Jasmine squeezes my arm. "Tommy, I did it all the time." "I should have been with you. We should have been together," I splutter. Jake crosses his arms as the fireworks explode overhead. "And done what, Tommy? Stopped the bus? Driven us to safety?" He grins. "You were right where you were supposed to be, and we were glad for it." I turn to Lauren. "Lauren," I begin, but that's just the thing. Where to start? I draw the note from my pocket, the crumpled 20-year-old contract. It's still there, and impossibly undamaged. I look from the note to Lauren. I have so much to say. How do I even begin to? "It's okay, Tommy," she replies gently, taking the contract from me. "I know, and it's okay." She looks at the others. "There's nothing for us to forgive, but just for your sake, we forgive you. We forgive you, Tommy. I'll come back here, I tell them, and I mean it. I'll come back here, all the time, to the treehouse. Lauren has pulled a marker from her pocket. She sticks her tongue out to one side as she starts writing something down onto the note. The others look between themselves. No, Tommy, Jasmine replies with a sad smile. You won't. You can't. You can't come back here again. Not like this. This is it, bro, Wooly says quietly. It's been a ride. He reaches out his hand, and I grasp it. Thanks for helping to defend this treehouse, Tommy, says Jake. For one last time. Lauren folds the note and stuffs it back into my hand. She leans over and kisses me on the cheek. It's time to say goodbye now, Tommy, she murmurs as the lights of the fireworks flicker above the treetop. Goodbye? I repeat, shaking my head. That's right, Tommy, she says. Goodbye. And so, as the leaves shimmer with the stars in the breeze, beneath the glow and dance of the reds and greens and golds above, I say it, one last time. Goodbye, and happy birthday, Lauren. She smiles. Happy birthday, Tommy. It's been 6 months since then. I walk hand in hand with my partner down that track through the fields. The flowers are out in bloom, and the sky is a gorgeous crystal blue. That's it there, I tell her, pointing over to the tree. It's a little bit busier now than it was before. It still stands tall, rising up from the fresh green grasses all around. But it looks today far less alone. There's a gang of kids playing on it. A couple of cars are parked nearby. One of the cars is open, and planks of wood stick out from the back. A general murmur of voices forms a backing track to the kids' shouts and whoops of glee. Parents are chatting amongst themselves. A couple of dads are working on fixing up the treehouse's ladder. One of them passes a plank up to a girl in the branches above. It's tough to tell from this distance, but it looks like there might be a couple new hearts carved into the treehouse's trunk. I think about the contract I made with Lauren 20 long years ago. I think about the additions she made. Once I'd tearfully descended the ladder that final time, returned it into my roughed up work clothes at the base of the great tree trunk, I'd remembered the note and opened it up to read. This document is null and voided, she had added to the bottom. I, Lauren Bright, hereby release Thomas Evans from this here contract. May he be free, and may he be happy. Hey? Hello? I tune back into my surroundings. I remember where I am. My partner squeezes my hand. Tom, what's up? She asks. You look like you were miles away. Are you okay? I consider. Yeah, I reply. Yeah, I'm okay. And we carry on along our way. There was a notebook that survived the last fire I was called to. I found it in the smoldering remains of the ashes. I'm not sure if I believe the story in it or not, but I thought I would share it just in case it's real. Mama said there'd be days like this. It's a nice thought, isn't it? It speaks of a concerned parent trying to comfort her child to the harsh realities of the world. The problem is, I don't recall my mama ever saying anything like that to me. Even if she had, I don't think in her wildest nightmare she could have imagined a day like that one. The day I leaned against the inside of a train tunnel, soaked in sweat and grime, staring at the train tracks that dripped with the blood of my friend. Blood that should have been mine. My name is Joe. I don't think I'm named after anybody. Mama just always called me Joe. There are lots of things that Mama always did, like beating the tar out of me when I sassed her. Beating the tar out of me if I didn't kill anything for supper. Beating the tar out of me the day I told her I wanted to learn to read. At this point, you wouldn't think I had much tar left in me, but you couldn't tell Mama that. She was a big woman, and I think beating me made her feel better about herself. I grew up in a little shack in the middle of nowhere. Mama always called it a cabin, but it was really just 4 walls and a roof, hastily put together with stolen boards and nails from an old barn down the road. Mama always told me that she took good care of me. Of course, she told me that the cabin was a huge house and that learning was bad. I guess in a way it was. For her. I wasn't allowed to have picture books or anything like that. "I'll teach you everything you need to know," Mama said. That's what I call a half-truth. She taught me everything she needed me to know, like how to cook, clean, cut firewood, and take care of her when she was sick. Anything other than that was on Mama's forbidden list. How does all this lead to a boy watching his friend being horribly dismembered by a speeding train? Stick with me for a little bit. We'll get there. Mama didn't have a job. We hunted and grew food. Once a month, the two of us would drag our small, rickety cart to a truck stop on the outskirts of Larson, 15 miles away. We would set up alongside the road, selling homegrown vegetables during the day. Mama never let me see or talk to any of the people. "They ain't no good," she said, "and I don't want you taking after 'em." Mama had a special word for the people who lived in the town. Arrogant. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but found out later that it meant folks who don't see things the same as Mama. At night, we would go shopping in dumpsters. The next day, we would head back home with a few dollars in Mama's pockets and a cart full of treasures. Frost Creek was only 2 miles from the cabin, but to reach it, you had to walk through a railroad tunnel. Yet another thing that was on Mama's forbidden list. "That tunnel took your daddy away from me. I ain't gonna let it take you too," she said. The funny thing about curiosity is, you can't bottle it up, but once it's out, there ain't no way of getting it back in. I found an old children's dictionary on one of our trips. You remember the kind that had the pictures beside the words? Well, I started looking at that book, and before you know it, the stopper was out of my bottle. I lost a lot of tar the day Mama caught me with it. "We ain't reading folk," she screamed as she beat me. "Nothing in that book is going to put food on the table." But being young, dumb, and well, whatever, I snuck the book away from her and hid it. This was the beginning of my new life. Isn't it funny how when you latch onto something new, the old just doesn't quite cut it anymore? There was a large, empty cave where I hid my treasures. The few children's books that I had snuck home, my dictionary, and a pair of dress shoes that actually fit. I struggled to read the books, relying heavily on the pictures. My favorite was the one that told me about Halloween, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. Halloween was my favorite. The thought of getting all that candy just for putting on a costume made me feel excited. I planned my first trick-or-treat trip very carefully. I told Mama I would be gone most of the day and into the night, picking her favorite berries, which were already picked and hidden in my cave. She knew it was a long, dangerous way to the patch where those berries grew. She wanted to tell me no, but I could see the hunger in her eyes. It's funny how desire can override concern. Having gotten her blessing, I went to my cave, put on my dress shoes, ragged jeans, and shirt. I wrapped my supper in a red bandana and hung it at the end of a stick. With my outfit complete, I walked down to the railroad tracks and stared at the tunnel. The sun was just starting to set, bathed it in an eerie red glow. The stones that formed the opening looked like giant bloody teeth, just waiting to eat me. Mama always told me there was evil that lurked in that tunnel. I used to think she was just trying to scare me to keep me out, but that evening, things were different. As I stepped into the dark, I felt the wickedness inside me, like I knew I was doing wrong but didn't care. I ate my supper as I walked through the tunnel, leaving the bandana nearly empty. When I came out on the other side, the world had been transformed. Everywhere I looked were bright shining lights, and people hurrying this way and that. I stopped and stared at a giant yellow M. The smells that came from inside made my mouth water. Someday, I'll be rich enough to eat there. Mama wouldn't like that, I argued with myself. I dragged myself away from the site and started down a street that on any other night would have seemed bizarre beyond description. Yet tonight, it was the greatest thing I had ever seen. I smiled from ear to ear as ghosts holding plastic pumpkins floated by. Next was a trio of miniature superheroes arguing over which one had the most candy. I walked up to the first house I saw and knocked on the door. The porch light came on, and an old man flung open the door. "What?" he snarled. "Trick or treat," I said, holding out my bandana. The old man glared at me. "Do you see my porch light on?" he said. "Yes," I said, looking up. The old man looked up too, and harumphed as several more trick-or-treaters were drawn toward the light, like brightly colored insects. He quickly turned the light off, and they drifted away. "You see that, boy?" the old man said, pointing toward the other houses. "All those idiots with their porch lights on?" "Yes. Those are the ones you go to for your satanic, pagan candy." Not understanding the words satanic or pagan, I turned to leave, but the old man held me back. "I do have a treat for you, though," he said with a wicked grin. "Since you were kind enough to wake me up, wait here." The old man disappeared and reappeared, quick enough to be a magician. "Here you go," he said, holding out a rotten banana. I took it, and tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, hugging him. It was the last thing he expected. He pulled away from me, harumphed, and slammed the door in my face. I peeled a banana and ate it as I walked towards the next house, making sure the porch light was on. As I started up the walkway, I finished the banana and tossed the peel in the yard. A large man in his mid-30s stood on the lighted porch, holding a bowl of candy and frowning as I approached. "Trick or treat," I said, holding out my bandana. "Are you going to throw that away?" the man said gruffly. I looked at my bandana, seeing no reason why I should throw it away. "No, not the bandana," the man said. "The banana." He pointed to the discarded peel I had thrown into his yard. I picked it up and looked at the large man. "Trash can," he said, pointing toward the street. I walked out and saw a can sitting beside a street light, looked at the man, and pointed toward the can. He nodded his approval, and I threw the peel in, then walked away. "Hey!" called the large man. "Don't you want any candy?" I ran back to the porch, looked into the bowl filled with colorful wrappers, and grabbed a handful. "Only take 2, the man said. "It's still early. I need to have some for the other kids." I hesitated, then picked up the 2 that had the most interesting wrappers. "Didn't your parents ever teach you not to litter?" the man asked. Not understanding the word litter, I bluffed by nodding my head. "Where are they anyway?" the man said. "Who?" "Your parents." "Daddy's gone, and Mama's at home," I said. "Your mother let you go trick-or-treating by yourself?" the man said with an edge in his voice. Sensing that I had done something wrong, I said, "I gotta go." Then I ran across the street and hid behind a tree. Maybe I should just give up and go home. I pulled out one of the pieces of candy, opened it, and took a bite. My mouth exploded with sweetness. I gobbled it and the next piece right away. I could feel the blood rushing through my body. The sudden burst of energy dragged me to the next house. The lady smiled and complimented my hobo suit, then gave me 3 pieces of candy, which I devoured as soon as I got out of sight. The rest of the evening was more of the same. Polite smiles and lots of candy. My bandana never got a chance to fill up. An hour later, I headed back out of the town, moving a lot slower. My stomach began to feel strange and make sounds I had never heard it make. I stopped at the trash can I had thrown my banana peel into, and suddenly upchucked all the candy I had eaten. The large man came outside and watched me heaving into the trash can. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, breathing hard. "Here," he said, handing me some paper towels. "Clean yourself up and follow me." He waited for me to finish and then started walking toward the middle of town. I followed him until we came to a building with a large star on the front of it. I hesitated. "Come on in," the man said. "It's okay." The large man walked inside, closely followed by me. "Evening, Sheriff," said a man behind a raised counter. "Who's your friend?" "What is your name, boy?" the sheriff asked. Joe?" "Joe what?" "Just Joe." "But what's your last name?" "I don't understand," I said. My mama always called me Joe. Okay, what's your mama's name? Mama, I said, confused. Joe Mama? The man at the desk said. Really? The sheriff chuckled a little. Okay, kid, let's get you cleaned up. Follow me. He took me to the back hallway, where the cells were. I got nervous right away. Don't worry, kid. I'm just letting you shower and get some clean clothes. After I showered and changed, he brought me back out, took my picture and prints. Let's run them against the National Runaway Network, he told the deputy. Sure thing, boss. Nothing came back. Joe, how long have you been living on the street? The sheriff asked. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Where does your mother live? Once again, I was silent. Think I know exactly what you need to loosen that tongue of yours. Come on. He left the station, with me tagging along carrying my old clothes. How's your stomach feeling? He asked. A little better, I said. Good, because we're here. It was a large 2-story brick house. I could see from the street lamp that the house was well kept. When the woman answered the door, she seemed familiar. Hello, Sheriff, she said cheerfully. Hello, Marcy. I have someone for you to meet. We've already met, she said, smiling. He was dressed like a hobo. Well, I'm not sure it was a costume. I think he's a runaway. She shook her head and made a sad, clucking sound. Come on in. I've got to get going if it's all the same to you. Sure, Sheriff, she said. You know our door is always open. Thanks, Marcy. I'll send the paperwork over for Joe in the morning. Sounds good. Thanks. You take care, kid, he told me. You're in good hands here. I'll see you around. Thank you, sir, I said. He laughed. You can call me Ted. Then he nodded and walked away. Marcy showed me my room, apologizing for how small it was. Little did she know, it was nearly the same size as the shack I lived in with Mama. I laid down on the soft bed and fell asleep instantly. I woke with a start and panicked, alone in a huge room I didn't recognize, surrounded by comforts I never had at home. I jumped out of bed, threw on my old clothes, and snuck out of the bedroom window. I headed back toward the tunnel, with dawn about an hour away, feeling guilty for leaving Mama to begin with. But Marcy seemed so friendly, and the bed was so soft. By the time I reached the tunnel, my mind was in an all-out war with itself over which place to call home. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying attention to where I was and had meandered into the tunnel. Instead of going through it as quickly as I could, I kicked rocks and pondered life. Ray was the closest thing I had to a friend. He lived in a shack 2 hollows up from the one I lived in. He was born with only one working arm. The other one just wasn't there. One tiny finger grew out of his shoulder. It was the weirdest thing I ever saw. Ray didn't talk either. He only had a stump for a tongue. I never knew if he was born that way or if he said something real bad to his daddy. I never knew how old Ray was. He was full grown when I was still toddling around the shack, but he always had the brain of a child. Sometimes, when I would go dumpster shopping, I would bring Ray back an old, beat-up action figure that someone had tossed out. He loved playing with them, but the first thing he did with each one was tear off the right arm. I guess he thought it made them more like him. Ray loved the trains. Every time I saw him, it was somewhere near the tracks. Tonight was no exception. The hum grew steadily louder. The air itself seemed charged with electricity. The ground shook as I stood frozen by fear and indecision. The deafening scream of the horn jolted me into action. As I ran, the realization washed over me that I was about to die horribly. I stumbled blindly into the powerful light, helpless and lost. Suddenly, a hand grabbed me, yanked me back from the tracks, and shoved me into the emergency cutout as the train careened past. The wind from the passing train made me cover my face. Once the train had passed, I looked around to see who my savior was, but no one was there. I slowly stepped out of the cutout and looked around. 10 yards away, sitting in between the tracks, was a colorful piece of plastic. I picked it up. It was a dirty action figure with one of its arms ripped off. Oh my God, Ray. I looked down and saw a splatter of blood. As I followed the tracks to the opening of the tunnel, it intensified. By the time I tasted fresh air, the rails looked like the floor of a slaughterhouse. So that's how I came to be there, watching my friend's blood drip down off the cold steel rails. The noblest, self-sacrificing act I had ever witnessed, and I was the only one who knew about it. If that was the end of the story, most of you would just sadly shake your head and move on. But the story was just the beginning. I stood at a crossroads in my young life. If I went back home and told Mama what happened, I would lose a lot of tar for going through the tunnel and lying to her. If I just up and left, Mama would come looking for me, and God knows what would happen if she found me. I ran to my cave, threw all of my important things in a ratty old backpack, then ran back to the tunnel. Next, I took the basket full of berries, threw them here and there, anywhere there was blood, then sat the basket in the middle of the tracks and waited. I could just see the light as dawn began to fight off the darkness. "Joe!" came Mama's voice. I froze. I didn't think she could see me. She was probably just calling out, hoping I was close enough to hear her. My resolve waned every time she called my name. Finally, I saw two lights. One was Mama's old hurricane lamp, and the other was an oncoming train. My heart leaped and failed at the same time. The train approached quickly. Its horn nearly deafened me. It drove into the tunnel, destroying the basket. As soon as it passed, I ran through. Just as I came out, the lamp appeared at the other end. I slowly peeked around the corner and could barely make out the silhouette of a woman on her knees between the tracks. She was rocking back and forth, holding something in her arms. Finally, I realized it was the remains of the basket. My heart nearly failed me. I wanted to run back to her and tell her it was all right. I took a half step forward, then remembered Ray. Not wanting his sacrifice to be in vain, I quickly turned my back on the tunnel and started toward town. 10 minutes later, I climbed back into the open bedroom window, closed it behind me, and turned around to see Marcy standing there with her arms folded. "That's strike one," she said firmly. "You never leave this house without asking first." "Sorry," I said, hanging my head. "Well, come on then and get some breakfast." "That's it? What else were you expecting?" "A beating." "Who beat you?" Marcy asked, her eyes moist with sympathy. "Mama," I said, shrugging my shoulders. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I will never beat you." She suddenly released me and went downstairs, dabbing at her eyes. I followed and ate the largest breakfast I'd ever had. It didn't take long for me to start thinking I had picked the right household. The year was full of ups and downs. Marcy and her kids, Paul and Sharon, not only welcomed me into their house, they took me on as their pet project. I had never heard the phrase foster family before. Within 6 months, I had caught up on years of neglect and was able to go to school only 1 grade lower than my age bracket. They rallied around me as their cause, and we became a true family like I had never known. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Next Halloween, I went trick-or-treating again. Sharon had just turned 14 and decided that she was too mature for trick-or-treating. Paul and I had dressed up as pirates and went together, but got separated in a crowd of costumes. As I looked for him, I realized how close I was to the tunnel. Hesitantly, I went over and peered into it. To my surprise, I saw a woman silhouetted kneeling in the middle of the tracks, holding a basket as she rocked back and forth. "Mama?" I whispered. Somehow the figure heard me. The silhouette looked up, straight at me. Without knowing why, I felt a sudden chill run up my spine. The figure stood and began to walk slowly toward me. I was drawn towards it and started into the tunnel. Instead of being overwhelmed with relief and love, I felt as if I was suffocating. Suddenly the figure disappeared. Once again, my curiosity had overwhelmed my common sense. I strained my eyes to see where the figure had gone. I pulled out a small flashlight and shone it around the tunnel. My shadow seemed bigger. I shone the flashlight on it, but it didn't go away. The light just disappeared into it, like an empty abyss that even light couldn't escape from. Then I realized that it wasn't my shadow. It was Mama's. As I looked, the air became heavy and hard to breathe. I felt a presence behind me and heard the word Joe whispered in my ear. I panicked and froze. The dark figure came closer. I felt like I was suffocating. An icy tendril touched my face, breaking me out of my stupor. I ran with all my might. Before I knew it, I was back home. I slammed the door and leaned against it, shaking. "It's about time you got home. Paul and I were about to go out looking for you," Marcy called from the kitchen. "How was trick-or-treating?" I had to focus to slow my breathing. "Fine," I said, to buy a few precious moments to recover. "Well, I made pumpkin pie, but I'm sure you ate half your candy already," she said. "Yeah, I'm kinda tired. I'm gonna go to bed." She smiled that warm smile that let me know everything would be okay. "Good night, sweetie." A few hours later, I was having a wonderful, sugar-fueled dream about diving into a swimming pool full of candy when my dream went dark. I felt so cold that I tried to snuggle up in my blanket, but it didn't warm me. I opened my eyes to find the room totally black. No lights at all. I looked around to try to get my bearings and saw a shadow beside the bed move on its own. It reached out for me, but I recoiled. "Joe," it whispered. "Mama?" I slowly reached toward it. It felt like liquid ice running over my hand. "Home," it said, looking out the window toward the tunnel. I looked where it was pointing. "No, Mama. This is my home now." The shadow drew back as Marcy stumbled into my room, half asleep. "What's wrong, honey? Is all that sugar?" She stopped dead when she saw the shadow hovering over me. "This is my new mama," I said. "She treated me good, taught me to read, and she never once beat me." The shadow seemed to consider this. "Joe?" Marcy whispered to me without taking her eyes off the shadow. "I'll explain later," I whispered back. The shadow whispered, "Blood." Black tendrils shot into Marcy's ears. She screamed, but was silenced when the shadow filled her mouth and eyes from the inside, making her look like a living skull. I had no idea the kind of hell she was going through on the inside, but outside, her body was flailing around uncontrollably. Blood flew as she smashed herself against the walls as though looking for an escape that she could never find. "Stop it, Mama!" I screamed, but dare not make a move for fear of being pummeled by Marcy. Finally, the tendrils came out of Marcy's ears and she collapsed in a bloody heap. Paul and Sharon wandered into the room, rubbing their eyes. "What's all the commotion?" Sharon was cut short by the sight of blood and her mother face down on the floor. "Mom!" she and Paul yelled, running towards her as the shadow reached for them. "No, Mama!" I dove toward the shadow, trying to tackle it or stop it somehow, but my body passed right through. It felt as if my very soul was frozen. I crashed to the floor on the other side, knocking over most of my possessions. I watched in horror as the tendrils penetrated their ears. The looks of terror and betrayal on their faces are something I've never forgotten as the shadow turned them into bloody, struggling puppets as well. They slumped to the floor of my destroyed bedroom as I lost consciousness. I woke to a strange combination of hot and cold. The shadow brushing my cheek gave me shivers while flames licked the walls of my room. I looked around and saw my portable heater lying face down, still running. Its red-hot coils had caught the carpet on fire, and the flames had spread like the flu in an elementary school. The fire surrounded me. I glanced over at the 3 mangled bodies that hadn't moved. I panicked and jumped through the window as the flames converged, landing on the grass in the cool night air, then turned back to watch the fire devour what was my home and family. "Home," the shadow whispered in my ear. "No, Mama, you destroyed my home." "Home," it hissed, while tendrils hovered next to my ears. "Go ahead, I would rather die than go back with you." It hovered there as the mournful wail of fire trucks sounded in the distance. I reached out to the shadow. "Let me live my life, Mama. When it's done, I swear I'll come home." The tendril encompassed my hand as I fought the urge to pull away. Just when I thought I would get frostbite, the shadow evaporated. I collapsed onto the wet grass and stared at the flames as they climbed high into the night sky. The smell of plastic and wood burning made me feel like my own flesh was burning off of my bones, leaving me dead inside. The mournful wail ended as the fire trucks pulled up and bathed the neighborhood in a flashing red light. One of the firemen guided me away from the house, sat me on the curb, and threw a blanket over my shoulders. Slowly they got control of the fire. The angry orange flames were quenched like my hopes and dreams of a normal life. I watched as 3 gurneys, each holding a body, were wheeled out of what was left of the house. They each bypassed the ambulance and went straight to the coroner's van. I sat silently, staring at the ground. "Joe?" Ted said. My eyes didn't move, didn't blink. Questions flew from everywhere. The EMT, the sheriff, the judge, the jury. I didn't dare tell any of them the truth. After the trial, Ted drove me to my new home. We pulled up to a huge brick building, surrounded by fences covered in razor wire. The sign in front said, Larson Mental Institute. The gate opened and he drove inside. After he parked, he slumped forward against the steering wheel for a moment, then let out a long sigh. "Look, kid, if you do get better, I'll bring you back. I promise." 4 orderlies came out and took me inside. I'd like to say that my time at the Institute was helpful and productive. I'd like to say that I learned a lot and came out a better person. I'd like to say that Ted was as good as his word and came to get me when my time was up. As a wise man once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I've written more journals about the other things that happened to me in my life, but there's still a little more left to this story. 50 years later. "Grandpa, did that story really happen?" Emily said, looking up into my face. "Of course it did," I said. "Are you calling your grandpa a liar?" "No, sir," she said. "But whatever happened to that boy?" "He got better, grew up, got married, and had a wonderful family," I said, smiling. "Okay, honey," Joe Jr. said. "It's getting late. We better get going." Emily hugged me and got down off my lap. "Look at me, Grandpa. I'm a princess," she said, twirling in a circle. "And a beautiful princess, too," I said. "I hope you get lots of candy this year. Here's some to get you started." Then I put a handful of candy in the little plastic pumpkin she was carrying. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, then skipped to the car. "Well, we're gonna get going," Joe Jr. said. "Lots of trick-or-treating to do." "I can't believe she's in 2nd grade already. Where does the time go?" Joe Jr. said, looking at his watch. "Where indeed," I said, looking at Joe Jr. "Are you sure you won't come live with us? Mom's been gone for over a year now." "You know I can't do that. I made a promise." "Please, Dad, not this again," Joe Jr. said, putting his face in his hands. "I thought they cured you of this at the Institute. Aren't you taking your meds?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Son, they can't cure my problem with medication." I pulled out a pocket knife and started to whittle. Joe Jr. just bowed his head in resignation. "Okay, love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." Emily waved as they drove their new SUV over the dirt road that crossed the tracks and started the long, winding trip toward town. I watched them go as I whittled absently. The red, orange, and yellow leaves had given way to the dull browns. Soon winter would rear its ugly head. I smiled as I looked at the empty woodpile with a complete lack of concern. My jaw clenched as the air around me grew heavy. A shadow appeared in the chair. I continued to whittle, trying my best to appear as if its presence didn't disturb me. The shadow reached its hand over and gently laid it on top of mine. "Home," it whispered. "Yes, Mama, I'm home." I smiled, ignoring the chills that shot up my arm, sat down the piece of wood I had been carving into a train engine, picked up my pipe, packed it with tobacco, and lit it. I took a long draw on it and watched the match continue to burn. The flame seemed to mesmerize me, as if staring at a microcosm of my entire life in that tiny glowing chemical reaction. I barely ever smoked, but today was different. Today was a special day. As the flame burned down to my fingers, I dropped the match on top of the pile of whittled wood shavings, then got up and went inside. The recommended dosage for my sleeping pills was 2 as needed. I took 2 dozen and swallowed them with a glass of water. As I write these last words that I will ever write, I just wanted to say a few goodbyes. To Ray, thank you for sacrificing your life to save mine. To Ted, thank you for giving me a new one. And to Mama, burn in hell, just like I will. I laid down on the old, worn cot and looked around the cabin one last time. Night, Mama, I mumbled to the shadow. The shadow caressed my face, causing me to shiver. I laid my notebook down, set it in a bucket, and placed a blanket on top of it. Fire crews worked through the night to control the blaze before it became a full-blown forest fire. Once it was out, they investigated the cause. They found the remains of the cabin and the remains of Joe. The fire had started on the front porch, beside what was left of a wooden chair. There wasn't much left to identify, except a notebook that had been covered up in a bucket. The very notebook I'm reading this story from. As they searched, they also found 2 graves. One was freshly dug and empty. The markers were badly burned, but still legible. The first one said Mama, and the second marker said Joe, followed by a short passage. Death, where is thy sting? My buddy Steve was a genius at making money without doing anything. At one point, he was enrolled in 12 different clinical trials at the same time. Some of these were for drugs that would have had bad interactions, but it didn't matter to Steve, because he never actually took the drugs. He did it like they do in the movies and just slipped them under his tongue and then spat them into his hand when the doc was turned away. Other trials were for new therapeutic approaches and things like that, but those were no problem for Steve either. At most, he had to lie, literally and metaphorically, on somebody's couch for an hour each week, then collect his check on the way out. But eventually, they caught on, and Steve was put on some kind of list. There was a nationwide ban on Steve, so that he couldn't participate in any more trials sponsored by universities or private drug companies, which essentially precluded him from that easy money. But Steve found a workaround. Not all experiments are above board and sanctioned by the FDA or whatever. There is, in fact, a hidden world of people testing things out in their garage, streamlining the whole process without having to worry about pesky and expensive regulations. One of Steve's friends gave him a link to a forum on the dark web, and after that, he was in the pipeline. The thing about these experiments is that if it were for, say, a new drug, they didn't trust you to just swallow the pill. You had to open your mouth and lift your tongue. You had to actually take the thing, because these people weren't messing around. But boy, did they pay. One morning, I was awakened by an insanely loud banging at my apartment door. "Who's that?" moaned my girlfriend, Sophia. I looked at the clock with bleary eyes. It was 5:55 a.m. "Open up, dude!" shouted Steve from the hallway. "Oh, screw him," said Sophia. "He could be in trouble," I said, shooting out of bed, full of adrenaline. I answered the door in my boxers, and there was Steve, bouncing up and down, his pupils each the size of the full moon. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm awesome," said Steve. "Holy shit, dude. This stuff, they gave me $1,000 to take this one freaking pill and it rules so much. It feels so good. Oh my god, Jay. Oh my god." My head hurt as I tried to piece together a thought. "So you're high, and you came to tell me that you got paid a lot of money to get high." I felt a surge of rage welling up deep inside me. "Ha, yes. I mean, no. Look, man. You're my best friend. I love you. I love you so much. I want to... No, listen. I came here because look, there's money. A lot of money. For me and for you. $20,000 for a video game. To play a video game or something, dude. 20 grand to play a video game for a few hours. Look, I'm just telling you this because I love you. You don't need to take drugs or anything. Just do some virtual reality stuff for a few hours and boom, 20 grand in your pocket. Just like that." The flood of rage died down as I tried to make sense of what Steve was saying. I couldn't. What are you saying? I asked. Why are you here before the crack of dawn? Sophia's pissed and so am I, really. No, said Steve, with a horrified look on his face. No, I want you to be happy. Sophia, too. Look, listen, look. You still have that Tor browser I set you up with and all that. I guess so. Good. Listen, look. Steve jammed his hand in his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. Look, just type this in and you'll see. You'll see. Easy money, okay? $20,000. You can finally buy that engagement ring you've been... I reached out and smacked Steve across the side of the head. Jesus Christ, dude. Keep it down, yeah? Steve looked shocked and hurt for a moment before the realization dawned on him. Oh, shit. My bad. I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. I wish I could delete it. Listen, are you going to check this out or what? He held out the crumpled piece of paper to me. I took it and shrugged. I'll check it out, Steve, but that's it for now. Why don't you head home and sleep this one off, huh? Yes, said Steve, nodding his head like crazy. Yes, check it out. I'll sleep it off. I started to close the door, but he stuck his foot in just before it closed. Dude? Yeah? Can I use your bathroom? I opened the door and sighed as he rushed into the bathroom and started puking his guts out. Steve received a ban from our apartment after that, but we stayed in touch. He would text me every few hours, asking if I'd checked out the advertisement for the video game trial yet. The truth was that I had checked it out as soon as he left that morning, but I was undecided. On one hand, the $20,000 sure was intriguing. That was almost half of what I had made in a year, more than half after taxes, and I had a feeling that this wasn't the sort of gig where they took taxes out. I'd be able to do a lot with that money. Take Sophia out for all kinds of dinners, maybe take a vacation and travel somewhere interesting. The kinds of things we always wanted to do, but never could afford to do. Then too, yes, there was that engagement ring. Sophia would say yes either way, even if I presented her with some rolled up aluminum foil, but I wanted it to be special. But I couldn't afford to make it special. On the other hand, well, the whole thing was sketchy as hell. Who pays some Joe off the street $20,000 to test out a video game? And why go through such shady channels to set the thing up? I knew from the start that nothing good would come from it. I knew that, but I did it anyway. Alright, I wrote in a text to Steve. I'm in for the video game thing. My man, we're gonna be swimming in freaking caviar, my dude. Steve and I drove to the address together. It was, strangely, a respectable-looking office building. We went up to the entrance and looked at the map of the building. There was a lawyer in there, a counselor, an accountant, and so forth. Shit, said Steve. Which freaking office is it? On cue, his phone buzzed. Oh, he said. The basement. The basement? I asked. Not for real. The basement? I don't know about this, man. Come on, dude. $20,000. And in such a nice building, too. I'm used to going to crazy people's garages and swallowing God knows what. This is going to be cake. I nodded, but as we walked to the elevator, my sense of unease grew larger and larger until it was screaming at me. Turn around! Whatever this is, it's bad. It's just a video game, I muttered. What's that? Asked Steve. I snapped out of it. I said, let's go play this dumb video game and get paid. That's the attitude, said Steve, grinning as the elevator door slid closed behind him. We rode down to the basement as I tried to calm myself down. It's a video game. In the basement of a respectable office. Probably, they could only afford to rent the basement. I shut myself up before I could ask. They could only afford to rent the basement, but they're paying you $20,000 each? When we reached the bottom, the doors slid open, and the first thing that I saw was a man and a woman sitting at a plastic work table in the middle of a large room. Other than that, it looked like a standard basement with equipment like boilers and hot water heaters and exposed wiring and concrete floors. Welcome, said the woman. Stephen and Jason, is that right? That's us, said Steve, stepping off the elevator. I followed behind and watched as the woman wrote something on her clipboard. That's fantastic, said the man. Right on time. Well, a few minutes late, but that's okay, he laughed. It happens, said the woman, smiling. People have things to do, and we respect that here. That's why we're going to get right down to business. Nearly so. First, we need you to sign the contract. The woman held out 2 clipboards, and we each took one. Before I looked at it, I took a moment to note that my unease had not subsided, despite the surface friendliness of the man and the woman. Somehow, that made it more bizarre, that they were just sitting there, so poised amongst the plumbing pipes running overhead, ready to offer us a lot of money to play a video game. Where do we play the game? I asked, looking around. I didn't see a TV or anything. Up here, said the man, tapping his head. I started, but Steve gave me a nudge. They'll tell us what to do, he said. Just sign the contract, dude. He scrawled some information into a few boxes and dashed off a signature while I read more closely. The participant agrees not to seek compensation beyond the predetermined amount. In this case, the predetermined amount is 20,000 USD for participating in one trial game of Total Control. The makers of TC and the administrators of the trial hereby relieve themselves of all liability for any injuries sustained during gameplay, with the express agreement of the participant. Injuries? I asked. What kind of game is this? The woman smiled. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to tell you anything about the game until you sign the contract. After that, you'll know all about it. In the event that the participant is unable to collect the predetermined amount at the end of the game, the makers of TC will transfer the funds to a person of the participant's choosing. The following box is for the participant to note the name and address of the next of kin. So you're saying that if we die, you'll give the money to somebody that we choose? I asked. Is that right? That's right, said the man. If we die while playing your game, I stressed. I turned to Steve. This is nuts. Steve shrugged. It's a lot of money, dude. Take it or leave it. I'm taking it. I tried to convince myself to leave it, but then I thought about going to Europe with Sophia. I wrote her name in the next of kin box and then signed the form. I handed the clipboard back to the woman, who scanned it over. Fantastic, she said. Now will you tell us what this game is? I asked. We'll do better than that, said the man. He reached down into a cardboard box on the ground and pulled out what looked to be 2 headsets. We'll show you the game. Please, gentlemen, put these devices on your head and prepare for an experience unlike any other. Or so we hope, he added, laughing. Steve didn't hesitate to put the thing on his head. It looked like the front half of a helmet with an elastic band securing it in place and a pair of glasses attached to the helmet. I don't see anything, said Steve. It's a 2-player game, said the man, nodding to me. I took a deep breath. It's just a freaking game. I put the headset on and looked through the glasses. Everything looked the same, except it had a slight yellow tint. I watched as the man reached into the box again and brought out 2 video game controllers. He handed one to the woman, and then they each pushed a button. I heard Steve scream a split second before I heard the hiss of some hydraulic mechanism being engaged just above my ear. Then I felt the most intense pain in my life. It felt like something was being jabbed directly into my brain, and that's exactly what was happening. A trickle of blood rolled down the side of my head as my brain lit up with pain. Then I was out of it. When I woke up, I was strapped to a chair, sitting opposite the man and woman behind their table, and next to Steve. There was only a dull ache in my head now, but it didn't take long for me to burst into a full-on panic. Ah, good, said the woman. You're both awake. She stood up calmly, walked over, and undid my straps. What is this? I gasped. What the hell is this? It's an experiment, said the man. Don't worry, we've ironed out some kinks since the last time we tried it. What experiment? I asked, standing up on wobbly legs. What are you going to do to us? The woman went to work unstrapping Steve. We've implanted a device in your head, she explained. It allows us to control your physical movements, or so we hope. Steve rubbed his head. What the hell? You're going to pay us, right? Of course, said the man. He reached into his cardboard box and pulled out 2 thick envelopes. I hope cash is okay. He tossed them across the table to our feet. Steve bent down and tore his open. I saw the cash inside. Okay, he said. That's worth it for the little headache, I guess. Alright, so you've implanted these devices into our brain. Okay, so can we leave now? You can try, said the man. But you won't be able to if we don't want you to, said the woman. And we don't want you to, said the man. Not until you fight to the death, said the woman. I jumped to my feet and tried to slow down my breathing. Come on, man, I said to Steve. That's enough of this. I bent down to pick up my envelope and then started walking towards the elevator. Thanks for the money, guys, said Steve. Then he followed behind me and pushed the button. The light came on and we waited for the elevator to come. Then I reached my fist back and swung it as hard as I could at Steve's jaw. It connected with a loud crack and I saw a spray of blood leave his mouth. What the hell? Groaned Steve, rubbing his jaw. I felt dizzy. What the hell indeed? Why had I just socked my best friend in the face for no reason? Dude, I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I did that. Steve spit out some blood on the basement floor. Forget it. Let's just get the hell out of here. The elevator door dinged. Sounds good to me, I said as the doors slid open. I went to step in when suddenly I felt a hand grab my shoulder and roughly spin me around. It was Steve. He had a confused look on his face as he grabbed my neck with both hands and started to choke me. My nerves exploded in panic as I struggled to breathe. I felt myself bring my knee up into Steve's balls. He let go of my neck and then hunched over. What's happening? He gasped. I brought my elbow down on his back and he screamed out in pain. I don't know, I said. I don't know. I looked over at the man and the woman, still seated behind their plastic work table. They were each holding their game controllers and smiling. What the hell is happening? The woman pushed a button and suddenly Steve lunged at me, driving his shoulder into my gut. We hit the ground together, my elbow taking the brunt of the impact. I'm so sorry, cried Steve. I can't stop it. I reached up and grabbed Steve's face in my hand. I didn't want to. I tried to make myself stop, but I couldn't. I began squeezing between my thumb and middle finger, which were spread out and gripped into the spot behind his eye sockets. Stop this, I shouted. Steve sunk into my palm with his teeth and tore a chunk of my flesh out. I felt a searing pain and a deep fear as he spit my skin onto the ground. I tried to will myself to stay still, but I couldn't. I punched him in the eye. When his head jerked back from the blow, I pushed against his chest and twisted around so that now I was on top of him. I took a clump of his hair in my hand and began smashing his head against the concrete floor, again and again and again. I was crying. I was begging myself to stop. I was begging the man and the woman to stop whatever they were doing. I was begging Steve to forgive me, as his head hit the floor with a thunk that sounded wetter and wetter each time, as blood gushed and sprayed everywhere. Okay, said the man after a while. That's enough. My player is dead now. I heard the woman laugh. I told you I would win. Suddenly, I was in control of my own movements again. I set Steve's head gently on the ground and knelt next to him, sobbing. What have I done? I wailed. What did you make me do? Now, said the man, standing up. It's not all bad news. He walked over and picked up the envelope of cash that Steve had dropped. He did name you as his next of kin, so you've just made $40,000. I looked up at him with blurry eyes. You monsters, I said, standing up. I'll kill you. I ran at him full of rage, with my arms outstretched, but when I got to him, I slowed down, spread my arms wider, and embraced him in a friendly hug. My mind screamed in terror and rage, but my body wouldn't respond. We control you now, said the woman. We're happy to let it go at this. You've served our purpose as a beta tester. We'll let you get in the elevator with your money, and you'll never hear from us again. If you honor your contract. Do you remember your contract? There's a copy of it in your back pocket. There's one bit that you should pay careful attention to. The bit about how you are never to tell anyone anything close to what happened here. Don't worry about coming up with an explanation for your friend. We'll take care of that. All that you have to do about all this is literally nothing. Don't say a word. You'll probably best forgetting it ever happened. There's a hose in the corner, said the man. Clean yourself up, take your money, and leave. And I did just that. I just wasn't sure if I was the one doing it. After I killed Steve, my life fell apart. Of course it did. I knew that I wasn't in control of my actions at the time, but that didn't help at all. I'd watched the life leave his eyes, and I'd gone on smashing his head against the concrete again and again, well after he was dead. I had nightmares about it every night, and the worst part was that I couldn't tell anybody about it. What was I supposed to do? Turn myself into the police? For murdering my best friend literally against my will? How would that help anything? I wanted to tell Sophia. I wanted to tell her so badly, but I couldn't. Those people had put the fear in me. We started doing fancy things together with the money, like going out to eat, but it was no good. It was like a part of me had died when Steve had died, when I had bashed the life out of him. Sophia didn't want fancy dinners and all of the things that money can buy. She wanted me, but I wasn't there anymore. I started drinking more and more. I considered suicide. Not seriously at first, but as time went by, it seemed more and more like a viable option. Anything to stop the never-ending guilt and grief. For her part, Sophia stuck with me for longer than I could have hoped for. But finally it got to be too much. It was clear enough that things were over well before the night we lay in bed together after yet another failed attempt at making love. "I can't do this anymore, Jay," she said. "I love you, but something changed after Steve's accident. I know that he was your best friend and it tore your heart out. But what about life? What about me? You didn't die. I didn't die. We're still here. And I can't do it anymore. It's been 3 months and I don't think I've heard you laugh once. I'm not blaming you, and I can't tell you how much I wanted to be able to do this. It's my failure, really. But like I said, we're still alive, and I want to live while I can. And I want you to live too." I clenched my jaw, trying to fight back the tears. Tried to think rationally. If you really love her, you'll tell her to piss off. But I didn't. "I have to tell you something," I said. Then, as my soul screamed in horror, I smothered her with a pillow. I've been in bed with Sophia's corpse for 2 days now. Yesterday, I got a text. "We have gathered all the data we need. Your contract has been fulfilled. Your unit has been deactivated. We thank you for your participation and wish you the best of luck." I don't know what to do. I'll start here by typing this out. "My name is Jay, and I killed my best friend and the love of my life, but I wasn't in control of my body at the time. Where do I go from here?" My brother's been missing for a long time now. I've looked all over the house and all around the garden, and even a little down by the beach. It's a windy day today, and I have to squint and shield my eyes as I scan the long grass and sands of the coast. The sky is a total gray, and the sea looks rough and cold. He won't have gone into the water. I'm not worried about that. He doesn't like the sea, but I am starting to get a bit concerned nonetheless. My name is Everly. I live here in our little house with my mom and dad and my little brother Emmett. He doesn't normally wander off, but he does like to explore. Confident that he isn't anywhere in or around the house, I shiver against the wind and set out further down the beach, away from the wild grass and onto the stones and sands, heading down the slopes that lead to the sea. "Emmett!" I call out, my voice quickly lost in the wind. "Emmett!" But I don't think he can hear me. I call out for him again, searching through the long, thin grasses at the edge of the sandbank, looking to see if he's made himself a den or a hideout or something. But I don't think he has, in truth. I can't help but feel like I know where it is that he's gone. My feet are already carrying me there, slowly but steadily, down the length of the beach and towards the rocks and cliffs that roll from the edges of the hills, rising up and up above our heads. "Emmett!" I call. Our parents always warned us never to go towards the cliffs, that it's dangerous, and the tide makes it downright deadly. But that's exactly where I'm heading. It's where Emmett has gone, I'm sure of it. The allure is too great. It starts to creep into view as I clamber over the tumbled rocks, between the walls of the cliffside, nestled between the corners and stony walls. A great, dark fissure in the rock and sediment. A passage, a secret tunnel, the secret tunnel, leading away into the excitement of the unknown in the depths of the cliff. My feet splash in the froth of the sea as I shamble awkwardly down towards it. We've often talked about it, Emmett and I. joked and wondered about what we might find inside were we to go exploring. A mystical world? Pirate's treasure, perhaps? The skeleton of an ancient sea monster? Or maybe even a sleeping mermaid? I grimace and furrow my brow with anxiousness as I imagine Emmett coming down here all by himself. Maybe I was dumb for fantasizing with him. What if all I did was encourage him to venture out alone? The fissure looms dark and tall as I approach. I have to keep a hand to the side of my forehead to keep my hair from blowing and whipping into my eyes in the wind. Am I really going to do this? Am I really going to go inside? But I have to. I have to at least take a look. So I peer inside. The wind echoes around the wet rock walls. Emmett? I call down into the gloom, but the sound is quickly absorbed into the tunnel. There's enough light to see, so I creep on inside, carefully stepping around wave-smoothed rocks and splashing lightly through the water at my shoes, leaving the wail of the weather behind me. The feeling of the wind against my skin lessens immediately and significantly. Its sound becomes a backing rumble that replaces its roaring rush, and my hair, once it's tied up, actually keeps its place. I call out for my brother again, cautiously, and in a quieter voice. Why quieter, Heverly? It's not a question I can answer. The tunnel gets smaller as it winds into the gloom, and towards its far end it rounds a sharp corner. I'm only small, but I still have to crouch and squeeze my way through the gap in the rock here before I can continue on along my way. So with a grunt of effort, I push myself through, stumbling and landing in a slightly deeper pool of cave water on the other side, one that comes almost up to my knees. It's cold. I shiver and climb up onto the stone, looking ahead down the natural corridor that leads away before me through the cliff. There are lights down there, I notice, blue and dim, but shimmering, and how could I ignore them? I clamber across the rock and stone, down to the end of the passageway. Lifting my gaze reveals the source of the light, and it looks like a little lantern, almost, fixed into the stone and glowing a faint but pleasant pale blue. Hello, says a small voice just behind and below me. Are you lost, little girl? My heart jumps in surprise, but I'm not scared as I turn around. The voice didn't sound scary. I look down to see a small blue man looking back up at me. He can't be taller than knee height, and he has large eyes and long fingers. Toes too, and they're all webbed. He looks like he could be covered in scales, but I sigh that it might be a bit rude to ask about that. Hi, I reply. It's nice to meet you. No, I'm not lost. I'm just looking for my brother. It's nice to meet you too. The little man beams up at me. Your brother, you say? What's his name? His name is Emmett. He looks kind of like me, but he's younger and shorter. His hair is darker. Have you seen him come by? The little blue man rubs his chin in thought as the light behind me flickers. No, he says eventually, putting up his shoulders in an apologetic shrug. But he still might have come through. Would you like to take a look with me? We can ask some of the others. Are there others like you? I ask him, and he smiles. Oh yes. And he puts out his little hand. My name is Og, by the way. What's yours? He'll know the layout of the tunnels. He can be a guide to help me find Emmett. I smile back and take his little hand in my own. It feels cold and a bit slimy, but I don't say anything as I don't want to offend him. My name is Everly. Nice to meet you, Og. He leads me around a rock and through another lamp-lined tunnel, and the passage quickly widens out into an enormous cavern, illuminated with pale blue and flickering orange from all over. Whoa, I murmur in awe, staring wide-eyed all around at the scene before me. Towering columns of inner cliff rock have been carved into buildings and bridges by way of arches and grooves and tiny doorways, and hundreds upon hundreds of little blue men and women wave to us as we pass them by. Some pull tiny carts full of shimmering stones. Some chip away at the base of a boulder with miniature pickaxes. I'll be able to help you for maybe 10 or so minutes, the man says as he nods at a passerby, then looking up to me. Then I'll have to get back to work, I'm afraid. So what do? I ask. Are you a builder like those guys? Stop getting distracted, Everly. Remember, you're looking for Emmett. Oh my, no. I look after our friend Carkino. He needs lots and lots of help to stay healthy, so that's what I do. Who's Carquino? I ask, standing on tiptoes for a moment to peer over a large stone, one carved in such a way as to resemble an ancient, if a tad blocky, church. He lives here with us, below the cliffs, says Og. We keep him happy, and we all look after him. A gentle rumble passes through the stone beneath our feet. Is he like you? I ask. Carquino, I mean. The little blue man chuckles. Goodness me, no, he smiles. No, he isn't. Would he know where to find my brother? I ask. No, Og replies. I shouldn't think that he would, and besides, he doesn't usually like to be disturbed. Huh? I reply. Carquino? Og glances down to an intricate, shiny little timepiece attached around his wrist. Goodness me, he starts. I have less time than I thought. I'm sorry, Everly. I'm going to have to go. I do hope you find your brother. Feel free to ask around. I'm sure anybody would be happy to help. He takes off at a jog, turning around to wave back at me as he winds his way through waist-high, stony passages. Bye, I call after him, raising a hand in goodbye. He's a curious guy, but he reminds me that there's a lot going on down here that I don't understand. And I would be smart to just find Emmett, and then maybe come back another day. All around me now, the little people are nodding and smiling and waving at me as they go about their business. They're so much bigger up close, one says to her friend, then scuttles away into shadow when I turn to look at her. Her friend shrugs and apologizes. Sorry about her, she's never seen a human so close before. It's okay, I tell her. Hey, do you think you could help me? I'm looking for my brother. He's a human too. Have you seen anyone like me come through today? The two young blue ladies look at each other in silence, a silence which hangs for a moment in the air before the more confident of the two chooses to speak. Yes, I saw another human. A boy. He was exploring a short while ago. Really? I exclaim with excitement. Where did he go? Did you see? She shakes her head. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I was a little deeper into the cavern, though. He liked looking at all the lights. The lights, right. Got it. Thank you. I bow a little in thanks and hurry away through the city of shiny inner cliff stone. The small blue people tip their hats to me and wave as I pass them by. I see fewer and fewer of them as I go deeper into the cavern. Where is he? If he came down here, he shouldn't be too hard to find. Did that blue girl mean for me to go this far? I stand on my tiptoes and peer over the columns and carvings of stone, looking this way and that, and I almost step right into a little man just in front of me. Whoa there! He chuckles and I jump back at once. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I should have been looking where I was going. It's alright, young lady. Don't fret now, he says, and like the others, he tips his hat. Where would you be running off to at a time like this? I'm just looking for my brother, I say, for what feels like the 100th time. I'm just starting to get a little worried about him, is all. Well now, there's really nothing to worry about, the blue man replies. If he's down here, then he's perfectly safe. In fact, I tell you what, there's a big ceremony tonight. It's a little ways back there on the other side of the town. Big light show and lots of special guests. Carquino himself will be there. I imagine if you're going to find your brother, then tonight's show is a safe bet. After all, he shouldn't be too difficult to spot. We don't get many humans down here, after all. Oh, I see. Thank you. Whereabouts? The little man gives me directions and the time, then tips his hat to me in farewell. Just don't be late. In fact, you'd be smart to show up a little early. Find a good place for yourself to sit and to keep an eye for your brother. Yes, great. I'll head back into town right away. Just let me tie up my shoe and maybe I'll see you there. He nods. Maybe you will. Take care, young lady. He picks up the handles of his cart and sets off about his business, winding his way through the stone streets into the gloom, his wet, long-toed feet slapping slightly onto the rock. I finish tying up the laces of my shoe. The string is all wet and frayed, but it's okay. I can always replace them. I stand back up and am about to do as I said I would, to head back into the center of the town and wait for the evening show, but something catches my eye out there in the darkness, away from the gentle sounds of the bustle off to my right. Far off in the shadows of the enormous cavern are a series of faint and flickering lights, orange and red, subtle at first, and I only notice them due to the movement. But there they are, flashing behind a high and rounded ridge of rock. The lights. I chew my tongue in thought and decide to go after them. I'll just have a quick check before I turn back. I might as well. The way ahead gets progressively more difficult, and darker too. There are no little people here to help guide my way, only tumbled stone and awkward rockscape. It also soon becomes clear that I misjudged the distance of the lights, but I've committed now. I should just keep on going. As I climb and scramble, I also realize that I'm traveling in a rough, wide arc around the far edge of the town. The lights finally start to get closer and brighter, and I begin to hear a murmuring too. A gentle, woeful noise, and the tiny hairs across my forearms all rise with sudden anxiety. I jump down from a little ledge to the base of a wide, tall rim of stone. Looking up reveals that this is the rounded ridge I saw from afar, and the flashing red and orange lights spill tantalizingly over the top above me. I would need to climb up higher to see over, though. I choose instead to push aside my newfound fears and creep quietly around the edge, around this wall of rock. So staying low and sticking to the shadows, I do just that, cautiously sneaking from stone to stone. I don't know why I am so suddenly afraid, but I put trust in my instincts. My breathing seems loud in the darkness. Round and round I go. The rocks become more jagged, and they give way to a series of carved platforms. A collection of ledges, each with a small, boxy room carved into their sides. But there's a boy in one of them, and not just any boy. It's Emmett. I slam a hand to my mouth in shock. I can see my brother. He is yet to notice me, but he is squished up with his arms wrapped around his legs, clearly uncomfortable in what now looks more like a prison cell than a room. Squinting confirms this. I can see a series of bars keeping him locked in place. I creep quickly up to his cell. The others are empty, and I tap the metal. He grunts as he turns his head to look at me, and his eyes go wide. "Everly," he says, and I shush him at once. "Everly, you gotta get me out of here," he hisses. "I can't move here. My arms and shoulders hurt so much." "What did you do, Emmett?" I ask him, glancing anxiously around. "Why did they lock you up in here?" "I didn't do anything, I promise. Please, just get me out." "How? Where are the keys?" "I don't know. Look, the bars are only thin. Are you able to move them? My hands are stuck and I can't reach out, but you might be able to." I lean back and rub my chin in thought, eyebrows furrowed. Emmett's cell only has 3 bars, and they're actually pretty far apart. The first 2 bars don't budge at my shaking, but the third has a little give. I look closer, trying hard to see in the dim, reddish light thrown from the rim of the stone wall overhead and behind, and I realize that the bar is loose at the top where it connects to the stone. I look around me again, expecting to be caught at any second, and I start to shake the bar forwards and backwards. It doesn't go very far at first, but little stones start to fall and crumble from the rock, until it finally gives way with a rusty crack. I cringe at the noise, fumbling with the fallen bar to keep it from landing hard on the ground at my feet. But I don't think anyone heard. Nobody comes running, at least. Emmett grunts and whimpers in pain as he scooches himself sideways and through the newly provided gap in the cell. He is pressed up against the rock, and the remaining central bar turns his skin white as he pushes past it. I grab his sleeve and help to pull him out, but he can't keep himself from slipping and stumbling and landing with a thud against the stone as he falls, his arms and legs too cramped to jump so quickly back into life. "It hurts," he groans, gritting his teeth and trying to stretch out one of his shaking arms. The lights have begun to brighten in intensity. Our shadows darken, and I look up to their source. Noises have begun to grow from behind the massive, circular walls of stone. A general murmuring, growing into a clamor with shouts and laughs and cheers. "Oh my goodness," I whisper. "They're all here. They're all behind this wall." "We gotta go, Everly. We have to go right now." "But they seem so friendly, Emmett. Are you sure that you didn't—" "I didn't do anything, okay?" "Okay, shh. Be quiet. I believe you. I just don't understand." A voice warbles from behind the great wall. "A real treat for you tonight, ladies and gentlefolk of the cavern. A triple helping. That's right. Not 1, not 2, but 3 special friends will be introduced to Carquino, and I'm sure he's just aching to meet them." This voice, louder than the rest, is met with a rumble of cheers and roars. My heart starts to pound. I grab Emmett's sleeve and begin to drag him around the edge of the wall, through the rough and tumbled rock and shadow. He does his best to keep up, though he stumbles on his aching legs. Something is wrong down here. Something is very, very wrong. Around we go until we reach the great and rounded wall's stony end. To our left lies the vast, rocky shadows of the cavern, perfect for sneaking through, undetected. But the way is blocked by a dark, deep fissure in the ground. Ahead and just to the right are pale blue lights of the town, with what I believe to be the cavern's entrance at the very far side. And to our immediate right are a series of stone steps and crags. I look up. I could climb them to the top of the wall, get a look at what's going on if I wanted. But more importantly, I could climb from the wall to a nearby outcrop of stone, jump and crawl across, and shimmy down into the shadows on our left. We could leave without being seen, as long as we were careful at this first part. It's either that, or head directly through the town, or retrace our steps, I guess. I share my thoughts with Emmett as the crowd roars. I ask him about how he feels to climb. He winces and stretches his joints with little pops and cracks, but nods and agrees. We're going to climb up, across, and then down and slink through the shadows. So with a deep breath, I clamber up, step by step. I reach down a hand to help Emmett as we draw nearer the top of the ridge. The lights are much brighter here, the noise much louder. I hear cheering and whooping and shouts of praise and glee. And there's a smell, too. Something thick and metallic that makes me want to gag. We sit perched, Emmett and I, waiting for a particularly loud cheer. In that moment, I give my brother an encouraging push, and he makes the little jump to the outcrop of stone. He lands with a grunt, but shoots over a thumbs up, creeping across it on his belly before turning and climbing down on the other side of the fissure into the safety of the shadows. I'm about to do the same, preparing to jump, when a new wave of shouts and screams of delight wash over the rim of the wall. A new burst of that strange, sickly smell. And I admit it, I am too curious. I have to have a look. Just one quick look. So before I jump across, I raise myself up on shaking knees, doing my best to stay hidden, but peering over the top of the rock wall to see what lies behind. My eyes widen in despair at what I see. The heights of stone, which appear as just a rounded, rocky wall from the outside, are revealed as the tiered, layered walls of a stadium full of the little blue townspeople. They sit in rows that go way, way down to a huge, red-orange, illuminated pit deep below us. The great Carcino has been carved into the stone of one of the walls, and below us, below the cheering and crowds, is Carcino himself, I can only presume. Carcino is monstrous, enormous, black and gray with markings of white and cold icy blue. He is an armored beast, a terrible crab-like cave dweller with spiked and dripping flesh visible in the cracks of his shell. His eyes are black and soulless and swivel of their own accord on slimy, searching stalks. His sharp, serrated claws strike down, and with an accompanying fresh burst of that metallic, sickly smell, it gores into the ruined, crushed and torn apart body of what could have only been a human. The fleshy mass shudders as its ligaments are ripped away from its torso with a spout and a splash of dark, flowing blood, and Carcino shovels the oozing biomatter into his mouth, gnashing and gnawing and grinding as the tendons snap and peel away, as his colossal legs clack against the dark-stained stone, and crunch and squish into piles of surrounding bones and gray, decaying flesh. The crowd roars in delight, salivating and screaming, their eyes wide with fulfillment and red in the reflected light of the arena, stark against the blue of their skin. Shivering, I slowly lower myself back down below the rim of stone. I do as Emmett had done, and we make our way over the fissure and through the shadows at the edge of the town. It's all blurry, this part, but I remember leaving the cheering behind us, the red lights of the arena, and the pale blue of the town and the lamps. We were able to find our way back to the little pool, and we squeezed ourselves back through the gap in the corridor of tight rock. I remember the way the moonlight filtered in through the great crack at the end of the passage, and the way that the sea looked so much calmer. The gentle froth and soothing waves shone silver in the dark night air. I didn't say a word for the rest of the day, or the day after, for that matter. My parents were so worried. Emmett thought he understood, but he didn't really. I don't think he knew what would have happened to him had I not found him locked up in that stony cell. My desperate pleas for us to move away, I hope, are slowly chipping away at my parents' resolve, but I fear every night that it won't be fast enough, because I see them in my nightmares, the little blue people, and Carquino, waiting down in the darkness below the cliffs. I check for the hammer I've been keeping under my pillow before I fall asleep, as I always do, and I lay awake in the darkness, trying to keep the sounds of the stadium from my head. Emmett and I are both a little more cautious about our adventures these days. My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together to go hiking somewhere further from home. We've been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back and finally found the time. Well, she always made the time. It was mainly me that had trouble balancing work with anything else. Looking back now, I wish I had spent more of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I had been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip. The week before we left, she was texting me about restaurants in the area, stuff to do. She even made a Spotify playlist with both of our favorites so we could listen to 7 hours worth of an eclectic mix of classic rock, pop, and black metal, and was marketing trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps app. I felt bad for putting off the trip for so long. We got to catch up, explore, try cool food. We had a great trip up until our final hike. We're both in decent shape, and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight, we decided we were going to try a longer, unpaved trail that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip, and we decided to take a more difficult and less crowded trail. Initially, it was a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was thinner than we were used to, but so refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran right into Sam's back. I'd been falling behind, focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in the soft dirt so I didn't go sliding down 20 feet to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pines. She looked back at me, her face tight. "Did you see that?" "The deer? Yeah, it was pretty magical." She gave a little laugh as she started up again so we could both move on to the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. "No, I mean, something was wrong with that deer. It was way too comfortable around me, and I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making these weird sounds." We continued on in silence after that as we focused on our footing and the scenery, stopping every so often to take pictures. One time, when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up on the hill. I got the bear spray out and held on to it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big, too. Eventually, the hiking trail rose to meet the higher part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college, I'd sprained my ankle badly, but couldn't afford to see a doctor. It healed a bit oddly, and since then, my left ankle has been iffy. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment, walking uphill for an hour in addition to the 6,500 foot elevation. I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit, too. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wildflowers about 10 feet into the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam?" I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder and I gripped my container of bear spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or more specifically, it was the deer. The same one that Sam and I had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issues approaching me. It was scrawny, walked slowly, but like it had too much to drink, and it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it to go away. I knew it was sick and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped me the hell out. It cocked its head and seemed to be studying me, looking me up and down. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way which deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam!" She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back, it had gone. "Are you okay? What happened?" "The creepy deer was back. I know it sounds silly, but I think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabid?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically. "Possibly. Or I wonder if it has CWD. Either way, we should probably let the park rangers know just in case." We had decided we'd stick together, but after a few miles, she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down, angling my phone weirdly to try and fit the scene in front of me in the frame when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice raised slightly, assuming she was talking to me. Then she screamed, "Sam!" I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was still holding our only canister of bear spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time, but then my left foot landed on a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail, my ankle rolled, and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes, flat on my back, about 15 feet below where I'd been standing. It was also dark outside. We started hiking at least 6 to 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused, disoriented. Trying to get up was taking all my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain. As I started slowly moving upwards on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading up to my fall. Sam sounded hurt. She was screaming. I had run after her and then I fell. Crap! Sam! I called her name, my voice hoarse, but no response. My phone was surprisingly only minorly damaged, but I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had our backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I didn't want to stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes, I had slowly and painfully ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was, sitting alone, injured, with my back to the woods, in the dark. I tried calling her name, in case it was her that I heard. No response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible towards the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily, the ground had evened out because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew that something terrible may have happened to her, but I kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind. As my calls to her remained unanswered, and it became harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay. I felt my throat tighten and tears roll down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay. And even if she left to get help, I think they would have found me by then. Somehow, eventually I navigated my way to where I thought she had last been. I was hoping maybe if she was injured, she was okay and just out of it and confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed, as it was now coated in mud and grime. I heard movement behind me. As the smell hit me, I realized the mud was dirt mixed with blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture. Leaves covered what was likely blood stuck to my face, and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife, my bear spray, but instead felt something hard and sticky. I was certain I had just found out what happened to Sam and had a good guess at what was about to happen to me next. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear labored breathing coming from above me. I waited, and then as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. She was covered in blood. Her shirt and pants were torn, but she was alive. I let out a relieved sob and could no longer hold back the tears. "Oh my God," I whispered as I slowly moved to sitting and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. She stuck to me where her shirt was still a bit wet, dried blood covering the neck of her shirt and her midsection. Her hands, and unsettlingly, her mouth, were also smeared with blood. I could still hear her breathing heavily close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked as I released her. She stared at me, but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after what had happened. She was a bit wobbly, but otherwise seemed to be able to walk. As we walked towards the car, she fell behind me, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had to try to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When we got to her car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to the hospital or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I pictured us making it all the way here to the car and then something breaking in the woods, attacking us. I decided we needed to leave now. "Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive?" I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving her baby. Plus, I wasn't sure I could drive us with my ankle as it was. She said nothing, cocked her head at me. "I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear." I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotion or reaction, I cautiously continued. "But I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road, or just drive straight to the hospital." She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she lost her keys in whatever struggle she had. Luckily, I had her spare with me. I unlocked the doors and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a little bit more because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. "Sam, get in, please. Something is out here still. Please." She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped back out of the seat and opened her door for her, and had to guide her in. I buckled her in after she made no move to do so for herself. As we drove, the headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior. I kept checking on her out of the corner of my eye. She was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now, in the better light, that she was drooling. "Hey, how are you doing?" No response, but she began opening and closing her mouth and making a wet, gasping sound as she breathed in and out. Her breath reeked and her teeth were tinged pink. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I was worried she had a punctured lung due to the strange sounds she was making. "Hold tight, we're about 20 minutes from the hospital." Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something. Her shirt was on inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I had a bad sprain and a concussion and would need a few stitches, but it felt so good just to be out of those woods. I asked the nurse that came to check on me how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I also mentioned what I had noticed about her shirt, and that we may have encountered a sick animal in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks, and I still haven't seen Sam since. Her mom hasn't either. She's been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found on the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said. And due to the condition of the body, they were asking for leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This might sound crazy, but I think it's her they found. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left those woods that night. It's my fault, and I don't know what that thing was that I drove into town. If you live in southern Colorado, please be safe. I'm sorry. I started reading a book about murder and just realized I'm the main character. Over the past couple years, I've taken up reading as a hobby. First, I started out with the classics the way most people do. Pride and Prejudice, To Kill a Mockingbird, 1984. You know, all those books I pretended to read when they were assigned in high school. And after I was done with those, I started searching for a genre to pique my interest, but couldn't settle on anything in particular. But then I realized that it's not the genre that entices me the most, it's the character. What's better than being able to relate to a character at a personal level? A well-written character lets you believe in the characters, empathize with their struggles, and get immersed in the storytelling. Characters are what give life to reading, but I only ever wanted to relate to those characters. I never wanted to be one. I picked up a book about 3 days ago in my local bookstore called A Small Town Murder. It was a lone copy on top of the stack of Bill Browder's new book, Freezing Order. It looked like someone had moved the book to the front of the store, almost in some kind of spite that it wasn't shelved in the forefront of a customer's bookstore trip. When I picked it up, the cashier immediately leaned over the counter. He was an elderly man with a bald patch and a faux gold chain connected to the arms of his glasses, drooping over the nape of his neck. I'd come to know him well as my reading habit developed. He was a sweet man who seemed almost as lonely as me. He gave a wry smile and pointed to the book in my hand. "That one's from a local author." "Oh yeah? That's neat," I answered absently as I tried to read the back cover. "Yep," he said. "Guy keeps coming in here and moving the book from the crime and thriller section to the front of the store." He shook his head with a laugh. "He thinks I don't notice, but I've been moving them back after he leaves. I don't know. Maybe I'll just keep them in the front from now on. No harm in that, is there?" "No," I said quietly. I was admittedly hardly paying attention to the cashier. I couldn't read and talk at the same time, and I was fairly entranced by the back cover description. Ben, a young man in his early 20s, lives alone in a small town in Montana. He starts to notice strange things happening around this house until he realizes someone is watching him. Can Ben escape his stalker before becoming his latest victim? I couldn't believe it. Someone had written a story with a character in a small town Montana. I hadn't been the type to read a crime/thriller novel, but the character sounded too relatable to pass up. He even had the same name as me. I looked up and down each face of the book for a price tag. There was none. "How much?" I asked. The cashier waved off my question. Honestly, the guy would be thrilled to know someone actually looked at the damn thing. Just take it. I smiled and thanked him, then took the book home. And since I picked it up in that store, I couldn't seem to put it down. The writing wasn't particularly impressive, but the character was fascinating. He was in his early 20s, had thick red hair, freckles, big round, white-framed glasses he hardly ever wore, but desperately needed. Unmarried, had a cat who slept all day. Sure, that description doesn't usually scream superhero, but he didn't need to be. He was exactly like me. What are the chances? I thought. Honestly, it was a little refreshing not reading about a rich, hulking Adonis of a character who was smooth and cunning and good at everything. The character had even taken up reading in the last couple years and found himself spending most of his time focusing on that new hobby when he wasn't at work. This book felt not too different from an autobiography for me. Sure, I've seen relatable characters like In the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Catcher in the Rye, Or All the Bright Places, I know, concerning books to find relatable. But of all the hundreds of books I've read, I'd never found one like this. After a couple hours of reading, I'd already glided through the first few chapters. The main character, Ben, had become rather reclusive as of late because of some traumas that aren't explained very well in the book. He was smart, but had some trouble socially in high school. There was also an ironic component. He lived in a small town where everybody knew everyone's name, but Ben didn't know anyone besides this sweet old man running the bookshop. When I read descriptors like this, they felt like personal attacks in a way. But it's just a fictional character, right? I thought so too, until I got to the 4th chapter, around the end of Act 1, so to speak. As the descriptors continued and grew more accurate, a sinking feeling overtook my stomach. The character's previously unexplained trauma started to come out. His best friend had been murdered 4 years earlier. My best friend was murdered 4 years ago. Reading this would have brought me to uncontrollable tears if not for the descriptors I'd already read. Instead, I started to panic. Red hair, freckles, heavy set, loner, reader, lives in small town Montana, has a good relationship with his elderly bookstore cashier, lost a friend 4 years ago to murder, is named Ben. No, these weren't just coincidences anymore. This was me. And then I read the lines where that first major plot point developed. There was a whistling in the cornfields outside his house. Ben had been losing sleep over a new thriller book he was reading, so even the slightest unexpected noise made him uneasy. But this was different somehow. Either via premonition or stroke of genius, preparation on the killer's part, he knew he was being hunted. Then it came. The rustling in the cornfield. I threw the book across the room, its pages flapping through the air until it smacked into the wall and slid to the floor. My heart was beating uncontrollably. I could hardly breathe. Then the cashier's words slipped back into my mind in a brief flash. That one's from a local author. The author knew I'd pick up that book. He was hunting me. That author wasn't just local. He was in the field outside my house. I switched on my bedroom light and waddled over to the window on my knees, trying to keep out of the view of the cornfield. I then poked my nose over the windowsill and squinted into the darkness. A few stalks of corn were still swaying, but I couldn't tell for sure whether it was from the wind or if someone was out there. An owl hooted from a nearby tree and almost made me jump out of my skin. He must have been watching me read until Act 2 when he could reveal himself, and start to make his clumsy pursuit from which I get away from in the interest of keeping the story suspenseful and building tension. But come Act 3, we'd inevitably have some type of showdown where perhaps he kills me. I scanned the cornfield again, still no sign of him. I crawled over to the book again, trying to find where I left off. After some searching and page flipping, I found my place and read on to see what was next. I could either see the book as a horrifying prediction of doom or a playbook. In the moment, I chose to see it as the latter. So I read on. Ben threw his book aside at the sound. Its pages flapped through the air until it smacked into the wall and slid to the floor. His heart was beating uncontrollably. He could hardly breathe. Ben switched on the bedroom light and walked over to the window, waddling on his knees. He then poked his nose over the windowsill and squinted into the darkness. A few stalks of corn still swayed, but he couldn't quite tell if it was from the wind or if someone was out there. An owl hooted from a nearby tree. Ben wrote off the sound for now. He didn't know where or when his stalker would strike, but he knew one thing for sure. He was being hunted. Since then, I haven't picked up the book. I can hardly look at it without my skin crawling. I think the killer is watching me read, wanting to play along with every page turn, sadistically waiting for me to read the script of my own demise. Then I remembered the other thing the cashier had said. No harm in that, is there? My breathing shook and hasn't stopped since. That statement couldn't have been further from the truth. We have this urban legend in my city called the Wrong Way Man. Supposedly, you might see him standing on the side of the road when you're driving. Some say it's only when you're on your way home. Now, I've seen pictures of the wrong way man. They circulate amongst us by text message. They circulate among students, workers, friends, and family here. Oddly, I've never seen any of those pictures posted online. I'm not sure if it's because of fear, because usually those who've taken the pictures want to perpetuate the mystique of our local urban legend, or because of something else. I was pretty sure those pictures had been a hoax, just someone dressed up as the wrong way man. Maybe it was the same person every time. As far as what the wrong way man looks like, he wears his tattered clothes backwards, usually a flannel shirt and jeans. His painting smile looks eerily realistic until he turns to the side and you can see it's a smooth surface. It seems that he shaves his hair off, paints a face over the back of his head, and puts a shoulder-length wig on that covers up his real face. Those who I've met who claim to have spotted the wrong way man say they waited a week before driving home, staying over to a friend's house or a hotel and not even bothering to go home to pack a suitcase. I've also heard, though, that you need to wait a month. The common consensus seems to be, if you see him while driving home, don't finish the drive home. Turn around, go somewhere else, and wait for at least a week. I thought it was a bunch of nonsense, until my date and I saw the wrong way man when we were going back to my house from the movies. It was Katie who spotted him. "Slow down," she said. "I think I see the wrong way man you told me about." Katie had only lived in my city for half a year, so one of the things I had told her on my quest to share with her as many interesting things as I could had been our local urban legend about the wrong way man. Was it a coincidence that we'd just been talking about him a few days before? I've never seen someone dressed as the wrong way man in person. Pictures, sure, but never in person. My foot was shaking as I eased up on the gas. It was dark, nearing midnight, and there were either no streetlights or they were off. My car's headlights lit him up. On the side of the road, he was facing us. Actually, he had his back to us. That painted face was facing us. The jeans and flannel shirt and wig were all turned our way as well. His arms and legs looked wrong. They were shoved down in his clothing the opposite way. I wanted to be amused, but I was alarmed. When we got to be about 10 feet away in my car, he turned his painted head towards us. Those painted eyes, realistic but forever held too wide, seemed to be staring right into mine. As we drove slowly by, I waved to him and laughed to try to ease some of the tension. He did not wave back. I looked at Katie. She was waving too, but she wasn't laughing. I glanced back just in time to see the slick side of that person's shaved, painted head, and the optical illusion of a real face being there was shattered. Shattered, but somehow worse for it. Also, when I peered into the rearview mirror as we increased our distance, I thought I saw something glinting beneath the shoulder-length wig he wore. Then he was gone, lost to the darkness. I picked up speed. He hadn't been walking, but somehow I was worried he would come after us too quickly. "So, what do we do now?" Katie said. "We can't go to your home, or mine." I glanced at her, and soon we both started laughing. "Well," I said, "after tonight, we'll be able to tell everyone around that we saw the wrong way man and went immediately home." "I wonder who was pretending to be the wrong way man," Katie said. "I wonder why they were doing it. Do you think we should turn back around and try to talk to them?" "I'd rather we didn't," I said. "They could be dangerous, but I'm just sure it's someone looking to keep the urban legend alive." "It's your car," Katie said, "but if it was mine..." "All right," I said, "we'll turn back around. My grandpa used to say, if you're in doubt which turn to make, you can always make a U-turn until you figure things out." He used that as a metaphor for life. But as I did my U-turn, my heart was thrashing in my chest. We drove down the entirety of that dark street without seeing that person again. It was a couple miles long in that direction, so there's no way they could have walked or run the distance so quickly. Katie and I decided that the person dressed as the wrong way man must have left the shoulder of the road for the surrounding woods. The idea of them hiding in the woods as we drove by again made me feel like I had spiders crawling over my flesh. We did another U-turn, and during that whole time, I kept glancing around in case that person jumped at us from out of nowhere. But soon, we were heading back in the direction of my house with no second look at the wrong way man. Katie and I tried to laugh it out, and we tried talking about other things, but both of us were pretty scared. We couldn't stop chatting about everything and nothing, or glancing out the windows or into our side mirrors. We turned into my subdivision, then we turned onto my street, and everything changed. As soon as we turned onto my street, we started to go backwards instead of forwards. "Did you put it in reverse?" Katie said. Her hand was gripping my arm. It was as cold as ice. I stopped the car. Both of us were looking down. The car was in drive. I took my foot off the brake and put it onto the gas pedal again. The houses, familiar houses I saw every day when coming home, were moving away from us. "Maybe something's wrong with my car," I said. But when I tried driving forward again, I looked to the side and then in the rearview mirror. We were not moving, not according to those views. In front of us, the houses receded every time I put my foot on the gas, but from the side and rear it appeared that we were standing still. On my street, everything was well lit. There were tons of street lights, so we couldn't argue it away as if it had anything to do with limited visibility. "Let's get out of here," Katie said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Yeah," I said in a similar way. "But how are we going to leave?" "Put it in reverse." When I put my car in reverse and tried that, we actually moved forward, but to the side and rear, once again, we seemed to have not moved, like we were caught just past the entrance to my neighborhood. It was when Katie and I had stopped the car and were debating getting out that we spotted someone coming towards us on the sidewalk. They were approaching us from the front of the vehicle, so I'm not sure how accurate the distance was. It seemed like they were already about 20 feet away. I don't know why it took me so long to realize this. Maybe it was because I didn't want to, but I recognized my neighbor by the back of his head and his body shape, which was somewhat atypical. I'd seen him often stooped, working in his garden while I was driving by. He was walking backwards towards us. When he got closer, he stopped. Then he began shouting, "Him what? Him what?" over and over again, standing stock still, his back to us. Only later would I realize he had been saying "help me" in reverse. I rolled down the window. "Mr. Nelson," I said. "What's the matter?" He stopped shouting. Now that my window was down, I could hear his body creak and snap. Blood poured out of fissures as the joints of his arms and legs changed drastically. When Mr. Nelson's head twisted all the way around towards us, I was sure that I saw the light go out of his eyes. Then, whatever had taken over Mr. Nelson made a first step with the new architecture of his body. Katie and I both began to scream at that first step. I rolled up the window as Mr. Nelson loped around on strange, inhuman legs. His kneecaps and elbows had been stretched and exaggerated from being reversed. I put my foot on the gas with the car still in reverse, and through the front windows we seemed to be careening forward. Even though a glance out the sides or in the rear view showed us to still be stationary, we slammed into Mr. Nelson. Blood slashed across the windshield. The car rose and fell as we went over his body. To the sides and rear, there was no indication of the car rising and falling. I did not see a lump appear behind us. I kept my foot on the gas, still going forward in reverse. I saw a window of a neighbor's house shatter. A couple I barely recognized crawled out like baby spiders out of eggs, leaking blood and more blood as they scraped themselves against the shards in the window frame. I don't think it was that they didn't know how to open windows. When the wife paused in the window, she smiled. She intentionally rubbed her scalp against a particularly sharp-looking piece of glass. Meat and blood came away. I think I could see the white of her skull. By then, her husband was already on the ground, running towards us. I sped forward. They and their house vanished in the sides and rear of the vehicle, which were, again, still stuck near the street's entrance. More people were coming out of their homes. They came out all twisted and broken, damaging themselves further as they exited. They ran towards us on backwards legs, churning their backwards arms. Everything about them was the wrong way. Before long, I found myself slamming on the brakes. "Keep going," Katie yelled. "They're going to catch up with us." Ahead, I saw my own driveway. Someone that looked like me was talking to another person with a painted face. The painted face nodded. Up and down, it nodded like a real face would do. Then, when I saw the wig shuffle and move seemingly on its own, I realized that the true face under that wig was talking, moving its lips, breathing. The wrong way man was talking to me, or someone who looked like me. At the same time, Katie was reaching over me, trying desperately to put her foot on the gas. A couple of twisted pieces of bone and meat collided with the windshield. Two faces with bunched up folds of neck leered at me out of glazed eyes. These were faces I should have recognized. Their twisted arms continued to beat at the window even though their eyes told me that no one was home. A spider's web of cracks spread across the windshield. Its grooves caught blood. I slammed my foot on the gas while helping to steady Katie back in her seat. We flung those two off, and right after, we ran over an entire family in quick succession. I didn't have time to feel guilty. These were not my neighbors. These were not my neighbors. These were not... Katie and I both began to change. I heard some of my bones break. I felt it a moment later, like the reverse of lightning before thunder. Katie and I started screaming, almost in unison and about in the same tune. It was like a choir of pain and fear and pain had risen up with us as instruments. "Keep your head back," I yelled as I strove to keep my head pinned against my seat. "Don't let it twist around. No matter what happens to the rest of our bodies, we can't let it kill us." "I know," Katie said. "Just get this car out of here. Make a U-turn or something." Make a U-turn, I thought. What was it my grandpa said about life and how if you didn't know what to do, you could always make a U-turn? Still in reverse, yet still going forward, I wheeled the car, screeching around. I didn't glance out the sides or rear. I gunned it, heading back towards where we had come from. The wrong way man waited. He waited for me at the juncture of my driveway and the street. His painted mouth grinned forever. His painted eyes were too wide and incapable of blinking. We passed him and drove out of the neighborhood. Katie and I weren't out of the woods though. I was able to get us to a nearby gas station before my legs and arms, which were partway reversed and leaking blood, completely gave out. We crawled out of the vehicle and onto the cold, hard concrete of the gas station. I blacked out almost at once, but Katie tells me she retained consciousness until the ambulance arrived. I don't envy her. We spent months in the hospital with broken bones and torn ligaments and muscle. I think the only thing that had saved us permanent damage might have been the seats of our vehicle resisting our changes. We told the doctors we had been in a car accident. They shook their heads at us and kept asking questions. I did go back home, eventually. We both did. The reason I went home was because one of my neighbors that we had run over with my car came to the hospital to visit me. They seemed completely fine, as if nothing had happened, and the wrong way man had never changed them. But damage was done to my vehicle, and to Katie and me, both physically and psychologically. And while our bodies are on the mend, I don't think we'll ever be the same. I feel the wrong way inside. I've come to learn that there are certain feelings that come along with purchasing a new house. These feelings can include extreme happiness, giddiness, and excitement as the new homeowner starts to think of all the things that can be done with the home. Perhaps they will think about raising a family, or thinking about the prospect of being able to have more people over to host parties, or even just enjoying the luxurious space that they can now call home. They might even feel a bit of pride, as becoming a homeowner is admittedly an accomplishment and a milestone that people yearn to achieve. As a freshman in college, and looking at the house in front of me, I thought none of these things. I cannot exactly think of a word to describe the feeling that looking at the house gave me, except perhaps disorienting. It looked fairly similar to those around it. Small, modest, maybe a bit run down. However, it wasn't any of these things that made me feel disoriented. No, it was the fact that the house seemed to have a personality. It had qualities that I couldn't quite explain. Nevertheless, A house was a house, and it was all I could afford. It had actually been my grandfather's, which he left to me when he passed away a few years back. I didn't want to find a roommate to split the cost of an apartment, so instead of taking on multiple jobs to pay for an apartment for myself close to the college I was attending, I decided to move into my grandfather's old house. It was a bit out of the city, but the commute was fine and was much cheaper than the alternative. I had never really visited my grandfather at his house, since he always flew down to us for visits, so I didn't really know what to expect. That's how I ended up standing in front of the house, moving boxes still in my car, and with me standing on the front step, the key clutched in my hand as I stared up at the house in front of me, apprehension and nervousness starting to seep in the longer I looked at it. I don't know what was wrong with me. I was probably being stupid, but the house just had a feeling of dread, of negative emotions around it, like an aura, if you will. You're being stupid. Grandpa didn't have any issues with the house, and neither will you, I told myself. I was immersed in my own thoughts, trying to convince myself that I was being utterly ridiculous. "Hey!" a voice rang out behind me. I startled, nearly jumping out of my skin as I whipped around to find the source of the voice. I half expected some crazy old man with a cane to warn me the house was haunted, or maybe a crackhead. In Portland, you can never be too sure. To my immense relief, I saw it was neither of these things. It was a boy, who looked to be around my age, standing on the sidewalk. He was tall, a bit taller than me, with messy dark hair and dark blue eyes. Looking at him, I couldn't decide if his hair was really dark brown or just black. He looked sheepish as I turned around. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. You just moved in, right?" he said, motioning the house behind me. My heartbeat was still pounding, but I managed to swallow and nod. "Oh, yeah. Well, I just got here. I've yet to move in yet, but the boxes are still in my car," I stammered. The boy looked at the car before looking back at me with a small smile. "Ah, I see. Well, let me help. It'll go faster," he said, starting to move up the path that led to my house. I was slightly taken back, but managed to compose myself as he approached. On one hand, I wasn't crazy about the idea of a complete stranger helping me move into my house, but on the other hand, he seemed harmless, and it was going to take me an eternity to move everything in by myself. "That's really kind. You don't have to, though. Most of the boxes are really heavy," I said as I looked at him. "I'm sure I can handle it. It's what neighbors are for, right?" he said with another small smile. Confusion crossed briefly across my face as I looked at him. "You're my neighbor?" I asked, glancing behind me at the neighboring houses to mine. "Yep, that one there," he said, pointing to a house on the right side of mine. It looked a lot more loved and cared for than mine. I turned back to him, slightly more at ease, knowing that he was my neighbor, and that he didn't look like a crackhead. "Ah, gotcha. Well, if you seriously don't mind, I'd appreciate the help," I said, giving him a small smile of my own, something inside of me telling me to trust him. The boy beamed. I unlocked the car and popped the trunk, walking alongside the boy as we walked over. "I really appreciate this. I'm Ethan, by the way," I said, holding out my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Ethan. I'm Avery." We spent the next little while moving boxes into the house, chatting and making small talk while doing so. Talking to Avery distracted me temporarily from the fact that as soon as I stepped inside the house, the feeling I got when I looked at it from the outside was amplified by about 100. It was really quite cold, with a sickening sense of unease to match the musty kind of character that the interior had. Trying to shake it off, I focused on unloading the boxes. After the last box had been put in the house, I brushed my hands off on my pants and looked around, smiling slightly at Avery, who had put the final box on the kitchen counter. "Hey, I really can't thank you enough for helping me out," I said, to which Avery gave me a small shrug. "It was really no problem. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me," he said, returning my smile before looking around at the house. "No one has lived in this house for a while, but it's sturdy and a great house. It needed a few touch-ups, but otherwise really great. Let me know if you need help with anything," he said before looking back at me. "I'll keep it in mind. The house isn't haunted or anything, is it?" I said, teasing in my voice. I expected Avery to laugh or even smile, but to my surprise, he looked a bit uncomfortable. "Well, that's something I wanted to mention," he started, pushing a hand through his hair. Looking at my expression, he hastily rushed to speak again. "It's not haunted. It's just... there is one thing you should know. This is an old house and has some pretty weird history," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "At night, you might find a yellow door in different spots in the house. You can't open it under any circumstances. Don't touch it, don't interact with it. I can't tell you why, but please trust that it's in your best interest, Avery said, finally looking up at me. Maybe he was a crackhead after all. A yellow door that only showed up at night? Please. I might be skeptical when it came to the paranormal and stuff, but this was a whole new level. Maybe this was some sort of hazing that the neighbors did for new homeowners in the area. Okay. If I see one, I'll leave it alone, I said, playing along and giving a small smile. Avery didn't return it, instead looking relieved. Awesome. Okay, well, as long as you follow that rule, you should be all set. I actually have to run to a class, but here's my number in case you need anything, he said, pulling a piece of paper and a pen from his pocket and scribbling down a number before setting it on the counter. I nodded, giving him a tight smile and waving as he left the house. As soon as he was gone, I let out a breath, the creeping feeling of unease coming back as I was left alone in the house. I spent the rest of the day unpacking and making the house feel a little bit more like home. The day went by, spent unpacking and debating whether or not to make Avery a contact in my phone. Part of me wanted to, grateful that he helped me move the boxes, but on the other hand, I was a bit annoyed at his take on hazing, talking nonsense about the yellow door. I tried to not think about it. Instead, I called my parents to let them know I was getting settled and started to get myself ready for bed. I made a mental note to replace some of the furniture to make the house a little more up to date as I settled into bed, checking to see what classes I had next week before finally putting my phone down and dozing off. As much as I hated to admit it, the last thing I thought about before drifting off to sleep was what Avery had said about the yellow door. The next few weeks went by without anything exciting happening. Although college is a lot harder than people make it out to be. My classes were changing every day and my schedule was hectic. I was stressed, since in order to maintain my scholarship, I had to have perfect grades in all of my classes. I tried not to show it, still being socially active and going out, but I was constantly exhausted, and the damn house wasn't helping. The house was old, I would give it that, but it was difficult to fall asleep, since every time I tried, the house decided that it was the perfect time to start creaking and making general old house sounds. I didn't think about the yellow door anymore, chalking it up to nonsense, especially since Avery had never mentioned it again. Avery, as it turned out, was actually in a few of my classes, and I saw him regularly. He was actually really fun to be around, and I made quick friends with him, often getting coffee and such together before our morning classes. Far away from my parents, I let myself notice the little things about him, like how his mouth twisted to the side when he was deciding to laugh at something, or how he tapped his fingers against the surface when he was thinking. Sometimes, he would be waiting on the sidewalk in the mornings, coffee already in hand for me. When we hung out after school, sometimes we would go to my house, although he never invited me into his. I had also made a small group of friends with some people in my anomaly class, which actually counted towards my science credit, since it was natural sciences. Two of the people in our group were siblings, Ava and Liam, who lived in Portland all their life and showed me the best places to go for coffee and pizza. The necessities. There was also Lucas, who was kind of loud and thought of himself as a great physical comedian, which really only involved making loud, absurd comments and flicking rubber bands at people. Despite this, however, he was fun to be around. With being around Avery and my new group of friends, life actually was more tolerable, and though my workload hadn't decreased, I wasn't as stressed all the time. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. It was a Friday, and after weeks of bugging me, Lucas finally convinced me to throw a party at my house. I had never really thrown one before, but Lucas helped, and by the time we were finished, it wasn't half bad. Lucas got the alcohol since he had a fake ID, and once he brought it all into my house, I realized that I had never asked how many people were going to show up. "This is a ton of booze. How many people did you invite?" I asked him, to which he shrugged nonchalantly. "Don't know. A bit, but most of them probably won't show up," he said, his words careless and sure. I was already jittery and nervous about this entire prospect, already having second thoughts. What if the cops showed up? What if the neighbors filed a noise complaint? Would that go on my permanent record? However, when I expressed these thoughts to Lucas, he punched me in the arm and told me to loosen up and to live a little. God, this was a bad idea. Lucas went into the kitchen to start setting up some sort of station, and I pulled out my phone to call someone. It only rang twice before they picked up. "Ethan? Hey, Avery. Where are you right now?" I asked, leaning against a wall, trying to sound casual. "I'm going to my last class of the day. What do you need?" he replied, and I looked around the corner to make sure Lucas was still in the kitchen. "Oh, I don't need anything. I was just calling to ask you a question. I was going to text, but then I decided I would call, since that would be better, and so that brings us to now," I said, cutting myself off in the middle of my ramble. God, what was wrong with me? Gotcha. Well, what was the question?" Avery replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I tried clearing my throat. "Well, I'm sort of throwing a party tonight, and I was wondering if you wanted to come. It starts around 10, I said, leaning my head back against the wall. There was a short pause, which was enough time for me to start becoming embarrassed. "I mean, only if you want to. You don't have to. I started to stammer, but Avery's voice cut me off. "No, sorry. I was just thinking. I'd love to come. See you at 10? He finally said, his voice soft and smiling. In that moment, I was immensely glad he couldn't see the idiot smile that came across my face. 10? Yes. I'll see you later, I replied, deciding to hang up while I was still ahead. A few hours later, people started to arrive. A lot of people. Eventually, I stopped opening the door and just left it unlocked for people to come in. I'd been to a few parties in high school, but nothing compared to this. I didn't really have the taste for alcohol, but Lucas had started following me around with red cups in his hand, telling me I need to live a little more. After a while of this, I finally grabbed one from his hand and drained it just to shut him up. Admittedly, this was a pretty bad idea, but it was also coming up on 11, and there was still no sign of Avery. I felt stupid and embarrassed, and not wanting to sort through my feelings right then, I decided to get another drink. More cups kept finding their way into my hands until my vision was starting to get blurry and the room developed a tilt. I had never done anything like this before, the entire night feeling like everything I was doing was an out-of-body experience. I had just put my hands on the counter in the kitchen, ignoring the sticky spills of alcohol and overturned cartons of mixers that I'd have to clean up later. I closed my eyes, trying to get the room to stop spinning, when I felt a hand on my arm. "Ethan?" a soft voice asked. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I turned anyway, being greeted by a tall, dark-haired figure with a sheepish expression. I glanced at the clock. 1:34 a.m. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter and trying to get my vision to focus. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I got caught up with something that needed to be dealt with. I'm really sorry," he said quietly, putting his hands in his pockets. I looked at him for a moment before shaking my head and running a hand over my face. "No, it's no problem really. You just need to take care of whatever you needed to take care of," I said, slurring my last words. At this point, I didn't even care. Avery looked like he was about to say something, but a sudden wave of nausea washed over me, making my eyes widen and for my hand to grip the counter behind me. Avery didn't miss this. He took my arm, quickly leading me to the bathroom. Looking relieved to find it was empty, he got me in front of the wide basin sink just in time. He stayed with me for a while, pushing the longer strands of my hair away, keeping a hand on my back. Finally, when there was nothing left in me to throw up, I sank to the floor, leaning my head back against the tile wall next to Avery. I couldn't remember a time where I had felt worse. "You don't have to stay," I mumbled, pushing a shaking hand through my hair. My entire body was shaking, a mixture of just having thrown up what felt like my entire body contents, and the rush of emotions that I'd been ignoring all night. "I know," Avery said softly. Without another word, he moved closer, putting an arm around me and pulling me into his chest. I didn't move away. I was mad at Avery for making me feel stupid, for making me feel like a little kid with an elementary school crush. I wanted to be mad, to let myself stay mad, but the longer we sat like that together, the longer I knew that I couldn't. I wanted him close. I wanted to keep feeling the comfort and protection that being around him made me feel. "Avery?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Yeah?" he replied, matching the soft tone that I had. "Please don't go," I said softly. I didn't say anything else, because I didn't need to. The way that his arm tightened around me, the way he moved closer so that we were flush against each other was the only answer I needed to know that he understood. We sat like that for a while, until the room stopped spinning and I finally started to feel more like myself, until I started to become more aware of my surroundings. Aware of Avery's arm around me, aware of the ticking clock above the door, aware of the kneading rush of exhaustion slowly creeping up on me. Sitting there against Avery, I let my eyes close. I let my body relax against his. I was tired of being the one who felt all these conflicting emotions, tired of being the one to prove himself to others. I was just tired in general. Eventually, I couldn't keep myself awake. 3:34 a.m. Ever since I was a little kid, I always remembered falling asleep, even on weird places like airplanes. As a noise startled me out of sleep, I realized that this was the first time that I hadn't. It took my brain a moment to register where I was. Sitting up, I realized that I was in my room, which meant that someone had taken me up there. Normally, I would have been freaking out, but I was oddly calm as my brain tried to walk through the most likely situation. I probably fell asleep on Avery downstairs, and he just brought me up here and made sure everyone had cleared out of the house. Sitting up, my mind still felt hazy, and I had the beginnings of a headache. But other than that, I was fine. I glanced at the clock. 3:34 a.m. It was then when I heard the breathing. I didn't have any pets, and it wasn't my breathing. Someone was in my room. My heart started to pick up speed as I sat up a little straighter and looked around, careful to not make any noise. There was a figure laying down beside my bed on the floor, a tall figure with dark hair. I let out a sigh of relief. It was just Avery. My mind worked for a second to think of why he was still here when it hit me. I had asked him not to leave, and he had taken that request seriously, along with probably making sure that I didn't suffocate in my sleep or throw up again. He was asleep, and his arm under his head serving as a pillow. I smiled down at him, appreciation and admiration surging through me. I briefly wondered what woke me up, but that thought moved from my mind as I realized suddenly that I was really quite thirsty, my throat feeling rough and dry. I silently moved out of bed so as not to disturb Avery, still feeling slightly sick as I made my way out to the hallway. I had just turned around the corner to walk downstairs when a violent bang came from the other end of the hallway, making me jump and turn. My breath seemed to catch in my throat when my eyes landed on the source of the noise. It was a yellow door. My heart hammered in my chest as my eyes were glued to it. Maybe I'm still drunk. Maybe it's a hallucination, I told myself. My feet started to move me towards it without thinking. As I got closer, I could see that it had originally been a bright red door, but looked like someone had painted over it messily with a vibrant yellow paint. All of a sudden, the house felt very cold, very quiet, as if someone had sucked the life out of it. The stillness was disorienting. How could I have never seen this door? That was the only explanation. I must have missed it. I didn't hang around upstairs much. Maybe it was Avery's idea of a prank. A joke. Catching me off guard when he had warned me about it when we first met. I was only a few feet away. I placed my hand on the doorknob. What would happen when I opened it? A jump scare? Probably. Just get the joke over with, I told myself. I twisted the doorknob and pushed the door open, bracing myself from some kind of practical scare. None came. Instead, on the other side of the door was a room. A nagging voice told me not to go in, but curiosity had already overpowered logic today. I stepped through. Looking around, I saw that I was back in my room. Confusion washed over me. It wasn't possible. Turning around, I could still see the hallway and my bedroom door, my real bedroom. I turned back to look at the room I was in. I looked at the clock. 3:34 a.m. Suddenly, there was yelling coming from behind me. I whipped around, seeing Avery at the other end of the hallway, running towards me, calling my name, panic in his eyes and voice. A cold, high giggle erupted out of nowhere as the door between us slammed close. "Avery! Avery!" I yelled, rushing to the door, rattling the doorknob. It wouldn't open. "Ethan!" I heard him yell from the other side. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" He yelled, pounding on the door as panic seized in my chest. What in the actual hell was happening? A noise came from behind me, from the other side of the room. I turned around, my heart stopping in my chest. It was a tall, black figure. Its limbs were too long, too thin. A black, smeared face with a white, painted mouth perched on the bed. It was grinning. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lodged in my throat. I could hear Avery banging on the door behind me. Suddenly, a voice came out of the thing. It was speaking, but its mouth wasn't moving. Curiosity may have killed the cat. More likely the cat was just unlucky, or else curious to see what death was like, having no cause to go on licking paws or fathering litter on litter of kittens, predictably. The thing said, moving closer. It cocked its head. "Are you the cat?" it asked. I didn't have the chance to answer before it suddenly came at me, its long limbs reaching for me. Its long black hand grabbed my ankle, pulling me down. As soon as it touched me, white light blinded my vision as I screamed. Pictures of things were rapidly flicking through my mind, none of which I recognized. A baseball field, a glass window, a blonde, a brunette, a river, a store. Picture after picture flipped through my mind as I could feel the thing dragging me closer, its jaw becoming unhinged, opening wider and wider, too wide to be natural. Behind me, I heard the door finally slam open, like someone had broken it, but I hardly noticed. Yells, followed by a horrible screeching noise, filled the room as I felt hands on me, dragging me away. Gentle hands, human hands. The pictures finally stopped as black started to fill my vision, and for the second time that night, I let myself fade out of consciousness. Avery and I don't talk much about what happened 5 years ago. We live in an apartment together downtown, far away from my grandfather's house. Although the house was only half the problem, I asked Avery many questions, most of which he tried to answer, but many others were left to my imagination. Sometimes I have nightmares about that Friday night, but Avery's always there to wake me up, to remind me that I'm safe, that I'm okay. Sometimes, late at night, when I went to go get water or go to the bathroom, I see the yellow door. I never go near it, instead retreating back into my room where I could be next to Avery, where I could wait it out until morning. After all, I didn't want to be the cat. Ethan? Theodore? Aiden? I'm starting to remember.